I was somewhat apprehensive about the meeting my 11-year-old wife had requested. She had asked me to meet her by the Tumbleweed at 3 p.m. I surmised that the pub would be largely unoccupied at that hour, and that our discussion would have little to do with socializing. I was subsequently disabused of this notion when I discovered that the Tumbleweed was the very location where she and I had met 13 years prior. I experienced a profound sense of unease, and I confronted her with the suspicion that she had been unfaithful to me with a colleague. I was anxious about the potential outcome of this meeting. I was fearful that I would learn the news that she had been unfaithful to me. I had noticed that she had been spending late nights at her office, where she worked as the boss's secretary. I considered this to be at least somewhat interesting from my perspective. She had also acquired new and provocative clothing, which she had never worn around me. Additionally, she had shown a decreased interest in connecting with me. We had not chatted much, even during meals. In recent months, it had primarily been me eating with the kids, while she came in later. She proffered a feeble rationale and a market dessert for the children. Megan is 10 and Max is 9. Her attempt at reconciliation was one thing, and it harmed her by putting the children on the back burner. This infuriated me. There were very few cars in the lot when I pulled into the Tumbleweed. I vowed to remain calm if she was going to do and say what I suspected was true. I suspected it all because of a conversation I had partially overheard 2 nights prior. Yes, I agree. Tuesday. Yes, I will get him there. It was Tuesday at 3, the time is 12 a.m. She had arranged for my presence here. I waited in the vehicle for several minutes, contemplating whether she was with the A. I was at a loss for what to do. My father's counsel from years ago came to mind, and it proved invaluable on numerous occasions during my professional career. In essence, it advised me to refrain from taking action unless I was certain of the appropriate course of action. It also encouraged me to avoid engaging in unnecessary discussions and to let my opponent discover the truth on their own. The less I spoke, the more I would worry. If my opponent was not concerned, it meant they were vulnerable. Additionally, I could make plans to complete tasks on my preferred day and time. It is crucial to remember that if you open your mouth, people will immediately know what you are thinking. One must simply remain silent and walk away. It is not necessary to engage in further discussion until all necessary information has been gathered and arrangements have been made. I smiled, recalling my affection for the man. I sensed that he was watching over me. I offered a silent prayer of gratitude for his guidance. I observed her sitting at the bar with a man I did not recognize, which was not surprising given my company, Steinbeck Incorporated, which I had created 10 years earlier, consumed all of my attention throughout the day, leaving little opportunity to interact with the employees at her workplace. I was an electrical engineer, and my company built wiring and other electrical schematics for a dozen construction companies that needed our services. I approached the 2 individuals she had noticed and said hello. She replied, "Not hello. Honey, there will be no kiss on the cheek. I will simply say hello, Mark, hello, honey." I said it pointedly. "What up?" The men turned to face me. "Mr. Steinbeck, or would you prefer that I call you Mark? I came here today to inform you that your wife and I have been having sex for some time. She has made it apparent that she is tired of sneaking around and making excuses. Therefore, I persuaded her to simply tell you. As I have already stated, I was half prepared for this. The audio recording device in my jacket pocket provided me with an advantage. I hoped I was getting everything I waited for. After all, my father was watching, and I did not want him to become enraged with me for being foolish. Mark said, and Karen waited for me to say something, but I remained silent. She must have thought I was in shock, so she began talking. "Mark, it has been extremely challenging to conceal this from you. I do not want you to feel hurt. I do not intend to leave you. It is simply a matter of engaging in sexual intercourse with Jason. This is simply too much for me to pass up. I hope you understand. I simply cannot hide this from you any longer. You deserve to know," she said. I was unsure if she was aware of how ridiculous her argument sounded. Karen had not finished college for obvious reasons. However, I had never considered her to be unintelligent until that moment. As for the military genius she was exchanging me for, I was unaware of the circumstances. I excused myself from the conversation and made my way to the end of the bar, where the bartender was attempting to ignore what he could not help but hear. I ordered a beer on tap and the bartender promptly brought it to me. I sipped it and remained silent, aware that the two individuals were watching me. I could see the confusion on their faces, and I drank my beer and left the building. I could feel their eyes following me as I departed. I felt a sense of control and confidence that I had not experienced in months. I felt as though I had the upper hand, although I was aware that this might have been a hallucination. I decided to return home, where I would find my children waiting for me. I greeted them with a kiss and a laugh, promising them a happy weekend. They were delighted, and we went for ice cream. I informed them about my idea, which I had developed earlier in the day. They were planning to spend the weekend with their Aunt Susan and Uncle Dax. They adored my sister and brother. In conclusion, Sue and her husband, a former Army Ranger, had been unable to conceive as a result. Consequently, Max and Megan became their favorite persons in the entire world. I was aware that Sue and Dak were going camping for the weekend and that the children would be joining them. This would afford me an opportunity to attend to the tasks that required my attention. "Is everything okay?" Mark inquired. "I have an exceptional ability to discern the truth," Mel replied. "I have informed you of the facts, Mel. I am divorcing Kieran. The children are unaware of this, so I assumed he had terminated communication with me. I observed a few statements he made. Sue also, Karen attempted to gain my attention last Christmas. I ignored her, and she made a joke about it to protect. She attempted to sell it, but was unsuccessful. Sue compelled me to remain silent. I am sorry for the inconvenience. I am grateful for your presence and willingness to care for the children for a few days. I require time to organize my affairs. Listen, Mark, and please inform me of any assistance you require. I will keep your request in mind, but I believe I can manage on my own. It will be a disorderly situation, but I have evidence and this is not a no-fault state, so establishing liability should not be an issue. After I leave here, I'll head over to Henry's to initiate proceedings." Henry Morgan was my company's exceptional attorney. He was, by all accounts, at least 120 years old but as astute as a razor's edge. He knew every judge and it was reasonable to assume that every competent lawyer in the state, and particularly in the city, would be aware of my capabilities if I were to discover Karen's infidelity. It was therefore likely that she would come forward with this information. I had taken precautions to prevent any inadvertent actions that might be taken in response to discovering these items. However, this plan was flawed. As I reflected further, the rationale behind her actions became increasingly clear. She was concerned that I might discover the truth from Sam Becker. In fact, I had planned to do precisely that. "Henry, I have arrived at your residence with some unexpected news. I have provided you with the recording as well as the name of the bartender who witnessed my wife's unusual rendezvous with her sexual partner occurred only hours before. I will serve them both on Monday. Are you heading home?" he inquired. "I will toss her out as soon as you inform me that they have been served. Malcolm will interview the witness and have him sign an affidavit tomorrow, even if in this business, speed is of the essence. It is crucial to act swiftly and decisively, leaving the other party in a state of confusion and uncertainty." "I often say," he said, I said. "I admire the way this man thinks. Mark, I am sorry to hear about your marriage and especially about Max and Megan. Do not hesitate to contact me if you require any assistance. Henry, thank you for your help. I am grateful for it." I left feeling quite positive. I had an ex-Ranger and a particularly disagreeable attorney were the only remaining obstacles to the success of Point. I was now obliged to adopt a passive stance and await the inevitable failure of their endeavors. I had instructed Henry to deny any involvement or benefit to the other party. He asserted that this would not present an issue with any other legal counsel. I was aware that I would have to provide her with half of the proceeds. However, Henry was confident that the evidence presented in the recording would provide him with the necessary leverage to secure a favorable outcome in court. If Henry's assertion was accurate, it was a certainty. I was reassured as I returned home for what might be my final weekend with Tobe, my soon-to-be ex. I was surprised to find a strange automobile in the driveway. It had to be Jason's. It was growing darker. I wondered if I would be fortunate enough to capture a photograph or two of the lovers. I parked a few homes down and proceeded to approach the house as quietly as I could. The lights were out as I approached the house. I noticed my next-door neighbor, Rex, pulling the trash to the curb. Rex was a police officer. I stood just beside the odd car, staring at him. He noticed me and waved. I nodded. I observed the automobile and was gratified to note the presence of another witness. I recorded the license plate number of the vehicle and will deliver it to Henry tomorrow, along with the name and address of the driver, and possibly a couple of photos, if I could obtain them. I entered the backyard as if I were going to retrieve my trash bins and bring them out. By that time, Rex had returned, so I attempted to take photographs surreptitiously. They were in the front room, and I used my cell phone to take pictures of them. The sliding glass doors in the back were fortuitous, as contemporary cell phones allowed me to take approximately 10 photos. I then put my cell phone aside and walked noisily through the sliding glass door. The two individuals turned, looked at me, and then resumed their activities. I proceeded upstairs, where I waited for approximately 15 minutes. I then heard the front door downstairs open and close, followed by the sound of a vehicle driving away. After the motor had ceased to operate, I remained in the hallway for approximately 1 or 2 minutes before returning to the kitchen. As I passed the downstairs bathroom, I heard the shower running. I proceeded to prepare a cup of coffee and await developments. 10 minutes later, she arrived and joined me. She inquired as to my well-being, and I did not respond. Instead, I merely sipped my coffee and awaited her next move. To make a profound statement, I was concerned that she did not inquire about the children. This was not the same woman I married over a decade ago. Mark, we need to discuss. My sister has the children. I thought you might like to know. Oh yes, I realized they were not there when I arrived home. She appeared flustered. Now, look, are you okay? I just wanted to be open and honest with you. I did not enjoy snooping around. He is a decent man and deserves better. It is only sexual intercourse. I will not deny you anything when we are together. Jason knows this and is fine with it. He is a good man. He decided not to hide anything from you. I could not resist. I am sorry, Father. I can have sexual intercourse with my lawfully married wife, and Jason is fine with that. I am grateful for his understanding. There is no need to be sarcastic. Mark, honesty is always the best policy. She stated that she understood, and that clearly, breaking her wedding vows was an exception to the rule. I was compelled to smile. I was unable to suppress my mirth. Mark, I implored, say something. She issued a command. What would you like me to say if I told you to call him and tell him it was finished? There is nothing to say, but you were correct. I deserved better. I was giggling inwardly, but my outward posture was quiet and reflective. She stated that I am not a or any other such designation. I am, in fact, her husband and a commendable father. I hold her in high regard, but I must decline your invitation. I am going out, do not wait for me. I needed to leave the premises. I could not tolerate being in her presence. As of Monday, she was no longer a part of my life. I have decided to end our relationship. She will become a distant memory. I recall my movements from earlier that day. I returned to the tumbleweed, where the same bartender was on duty. I sat at the end of the bar. The bar was filled with patrons, particularly on a Tuesday night. I ordered a beer and inquired about the commotion, indicating the crowd and the wolves, i.e., the men who frequent the bar. I then observed Jason engaging in sexual intercourse with one of the women. This led me to conclude that he was cheating on another partner. However, I was not entirely surprised. Perhaps he was not unfaithful to the other partner. Perhaps the other partner was unfaithful to him. The individual in question became aware that his actions were being observed. I was informed of this earlier today. If you require a witness, I am available. I may be of assistance. I previously disclosed to my wife that she had behaved inappropriately towards me. However, I did not have the support of an advocate, and as a result, I suffered significant harm in court. I am currently residing in this location, and I believe it would be beneficial for me to remain here. It would be preferable if half of my income were not allocated to alimony payments. We conversed intermittently for the next 4 hours. I made a mental note to discuss with Henry the possibility of bringing this individual to justice, should he assist me in apprehending Romeo and Juliet. It would be beneficial for those who have been wronged to unite. Jason was unaware of my presence in the bar. I was able to obtain several striking images of him, which I would use to demonstrate to my wife, provided she felt she was exclusive with him. However, that would have to wait until after the presentation on Monday. I arrived home at approximately 4 o'clock. The following morning, Josh, the bartender, and I consumed approximately half a dozen cups of coffee. After closing, he resided in an upstairs apartment with Northwest other place to go, making me an ideal candidate for late-night discussions. I hold this man in high regard, and he was an excellent bartender, which I considered a significant advantage. I was displeased with Kieran, but I desired to sleep in my own bed, not in the guest room. The appeal of a man's bed is a concept that I had not previously considered. My wife was already aware of this aspect of my character, which may have influenced her decision to engage in sexual intercourse in the front room rather than in the bedroom. I positioned myself alongside her, and she was awake. I felt her hand extend for mine, but I withdrew it and rolled over to sleep. She appeared to do the same. The light from the window, which was covered with holes in the curtains, woke me up. It was approximately 8 o'clock. I detected the aroma of bacon frying in the kitchen. I arose, engaged in my morning ablutions, and proceeded to the downstairs area. My wife was in a cheerful mood. It appeared that she believed the situation was satisfactory, or at the very least, that our marriage was not in a state of dissolution. "Good morning," I said. "I hope you slept well." "I did," she replied, "and it smells wonderful." "It does, doesn't it?" I was hungry, but I didn't have to feel. Although she was sad about it, she was aware that the situation would reach a conclusion the following day. However, she was certain that today would be a positive day. She promised to be there for me every day and said it was a favor to me because I was so rational. She also said that if I was good, I might be very lucky. She was actually laughing, and I was unsure whether to laugh with her or not. I was alternately disconcerted and amused by her assertion. How could I, a man of integrity, willingly accept what she was selling? I simply giggled back at her. I had a prior engagement with my vehicle, which required the installation of new brakes. I had to take my car to the mechanic later that morning. I was preoccupied with the task of avoiding her, a challenge that I knew would be difficult. I was disinclined to contact her directly, but I recognized that it might be necessary to employ a more assertive approach to prevent her from influencing the situation. I had my voice recorder activated near the kitchen phone shortly before departing to have the brake job completed. I anticipated that she might contact him on that phone, and my assumption proved correct. I found the ensuing suspense highly engaging, and it persisted for approximately 3 hours. Upon my return, I discovered her engaged in the disposal of refuse. I retrieved the recorder and proceeded to my office to review the contents. I was particularly affected by her assertion of love for him, as I was aware of his lack of interest in her. I was eager to present her with the photographic evidence I had taken of him the previous night, in which he was attired in a chickie. Such a limitation would restrict her style. This is me. I am unsure if Jason went outside to work on the automobile. I sat in my office, astonished at my decision to marry her. It was a regrettable choice. I was uncertain whether I should initiate a divorce. How could someone so lacking in knowledge be held accountable for her actions? The pain was too profound. The couple's evident lack of transparency made reconciliation impossible. Then, there were the children. She did not care about them. It was an unforgivable act. I was up and out of the house before she woke the following morning. It was Monday, and her lover's lives were about to change forever. I initially went to the office to inform my secretary, Beth, that I would be gone for the rest of the day. Being the boss had its advantages. The first stop was Henry's office. He had some news. Malcolm, his partner, had. By the time Pi had acquired some information on Romeo, he was married with 6 children. It is perhaps surprising to learn that his wife possessed the family's money for a decade his senior. It is said that she was unaware of his altruism. Henry was advised to take him down firmly and provided with the most recent tape and pictures. He was pleased at this suggestion. It was also mentioned that a special job could be offered to him at Malcolm after once the dust had settled. I was aware that Deck would soon send the children off to school. It was the prospect of speaking with them later in the day that caused me concern, but there was no need for concern, it was straightforward. Henry had arranged for the two lovers to be served at work. There was a restraining order against her returning to the residence and against him as well. The papers were scheduled to be distributed just before lunch. At lunchtime, I requested that Henry perform the task in a conspicuous and ostentatious manner. I also requested that he make any and all evidence against the two available to Jason's wife. I did not specify how she should use this information. I then considered whether I should be present when my wife was served. I decided to wait in the hallway when the server arrived. I did so. As I was not acquainted with him and he was similarly unacquainted with me, he proceeded directly to the office where my wife is employed. I was observing from the doorway and he did not notice me initially, as he was engaged in conversation with the server. The latter handed him a manila envelope, which I later learned was a subpoena. My wife's demeanor immediately changed, and she opened the envelope. The envelope she was holding in her hand caused her to gasp and begin to cry. She then fell into her chair. Her employer emerged at that point and attempted to calm her. I made myself more visible when she spotted me, and she closed her eyes. "Mark, I could not resist. I am sorry once more. As you mentioned, I deserve better." I walked out. I was not present, but I later learned that Jason was served in a manner that caused him to lose consciousness. Upon learning that his life was nearly over, he ultimately lost everything, including his wife, children, home, and job. I had been mistaken about one thing: Karen was not the world's greatest fool, she was merely the second largest. A few days later, I was sitting in Henry's office, sipping the hot coffee. I inquired, "Do you believe you can help him?" In light of the considerable time that has elapsed, I am of the opinion that the woman in question has a multitude of secrets. She is evidently keen to revisit the terms of their divorce with the intention of maintaining their confidentiality and securing the removal of alimony. If one is able to accomplish anything, Mark, surely you must now realize that I am capable of doing so. He laughed. "I stand corrected," I responded, joining him in laughter. Late that day, I proceeded to the bar and engaged in conversation with my newly acquainted acquaintance, Gus. "In light of the veracity of your assertion, I will never have to pay for another drink in this establishment again. I am unable to adequately express my gratitude, particularly given the fact that she rubbed my nose, which was causing me considerable discomfort at the time. I was pleased to be of assistance." I informed him that Karen's marriage yielded no tangible benefits. She was not dismissed from her position, rather, she had been employed by her superior for an extended period, during which he had tolerated her infidelity. Jason was no longer a factor in my life, as previously stated. I met Karen on the day following the significant event. I had something I wished to present to her. I was aware that I would have to endure her incessant begging and pleading, but I deemed it a worthwhile risk. "Mark, is there no way to resolve this?" The automobile in question was a vehicle for transporting the children. I had anticipated that she would attempt to persuade me, so I declined. "You have not demonstrated any interest in the children for several months. Karen, Mark, your attention is focused on your romantic interest. He is a kind individual who shares many similarities with you. I believe that is why I initially became attracted to him. He also loves me, which is why we invested so much effort into helping you understand our situation. We opened up our hearts and souls to you, yet you have chosen to. You have the power to destroy us all, including the youngsters. How could you?" She had truly annoyed me, making it entirely my fault. I was angry. "Mark, it isn't too late. There is still enough time to rectify the situation. I know I can convince Jason that you need to be the primary caregiver. You'll remain my number one. You are the father of my children. How could you possibly be otherwise? Jason exists outside of us. I will make you a very happy man if you only give me the opportunity." I was nearly speechless. I couldn't even be mad. This was ridiculous and stupid. She was foolish to believe in her tribe. She needed aid, but someone else would have to furnish it. Karen was no longer a concern to me. I had come to see you for two reasons. First, I would provide you with unrestricted visitation with the children, but never with your lovers. I would also give you some money to get you into a new starter apartment. However, after that, you would be on your own. The condition for this generous offer on my behalf is that you do not oppose the divorce. If you do, I will come after you with everything I have. Karen, you have no idea how capable I am. Is this clear? She gazed at me intently, as though hoping against hope that I would accept her back and be fine with her remaining world-class and number one. As I previously stated, she was going to need assistance. These are the second and third options. I handed her the manila envelope. Please check the dates at the bottom of each shot, I said. I informed her that they were images I had taken of Jason and his girlfriend on Saturday night. She took them out and gazed at them. However, these are from last Saturday night. You're not his true love. You never were. He is a player. Have a lovely life. I informed her that I would be leaving, threw a 20 on the table for the waitress, and departed the building. She was in a state of distress. Mr. Moore, your health status is optimal. Your cholesterol level is 127, your ratio of good to bad cholesterol is ideal, your lungs are pristine, and your PSA level is precisely where it should be. It should be, and the results indicate a 5-pound weight loss since my last examination. Therefore, it is recommended that you maintain your current regimen. If all of my patients were as healthy as you, I would be out of business. Doctor, there is nothing wrong with me. Steve, is there anything in particular you are interested in discussing? He expressed interest in the blood work, but upon reviewing the results, he offered no further comment. I am therefore closing my file and will see you next year. My nurse will schedule the appointment on her way out. At least I can be reassured that the two of them will not force me to do something unfavorable in exchange for giving me HIV or an STD. That is one thing I will never have to worry about again. However, I am still concerned about identifying the suspects. I have just discovered that my wife, Beth, has been unfaithful to me for the past 9 years. She has been engaging in an illicit relationship with one of our friends. I am contemplating how to exact retribution against her and her paramour. I am not in a hurry to do so, as I have the luxury of time. I have discovered that Beth has not infected me with an incurable disease. I am currently indisposed and there is no possibility of my ever engaging in sexual intercourse with her again, at least not in my current physical state. You are curious as to how I became aware of this information. She informed me in a roundabout manner, rather than explicitly stating that she was engaging in sexual intercourse with another individual. This was in the early evening, around 9 o'clock. Overall, it had been a fantastic day, and I was feeling amorous. I inquired in a suggestive tone if she wished to engage in sexual activity that evening. She replied that she was too tired and desired relaxation. I offered to provide a neck and back rub, but she rejected this proposal, stating that it was not what she wanted. To work tonight, she said, returning to her book. You are never in the mood anymore. Don't I do it for you anymore, Steve? Sometimes you simply don't. Maybe if we did it more than once every 2 or 3 weeks, you'd get back into the habit, Steve replied, setting his book down on his lap. I was taken aback by my wife's revelation. I was so shocked that I grabbed my pillow and walked out of the bedroom. My wife followed me and asked, "What are you planning to do now? Are you going to sulk?" I replied, "Do not worry. I will not trouble you again tonight or in the future. I don't do it for you anymore. I guess I'll have to go somewhere else." As I traversed the hallway and entered the supplementary room, I had heard her utter my name on a single occasion. I promptly closed the door with a resounding slam. I was not inclined to request sexual intercourse once more if she no longer desired it, and so I made the decision to either accept this reality or reject it. I retired for the night, or at least attempted to do so, but this was a significant matter in my estimation, and it dominated my thoughts throughout the night. The following morning, shortly before 7, the time was 0 a.m. I proceeded downstairs, fatigued and irritated. "Steve, I am sorry for what I said last night. I did not intend to be disrespectful, and I was simply tired. Perhaps we can engage in sexual activity tonight," she replied with a smile. "Beth, what are you doing offering me an olive branch? Maybe if I lie down and allow him to have sexual intercourse with me, it will all be over. You are thinking, well, phoo, I wouldn't touch your goddamn. If it were the only one on the planet, I would spit at her, so there is no need for concern. I will no longer request sexual intercourse from you," I murmured, grabbing my briefcase. "I will not be home for supper tonight. Simply gazing at you makes me ill to my stomach." With that, I departed. Beth must have departed when the hunter began emailing me after lunch. She called. I terminated her access to both my cell phone and my business line, thus eliminating the necessity of contemplating her feelings of culpability. Her conduct over the previous 6 months had become wholly reprehensible, and I was thoroughly disillusioned. Our sexual intercourse occurred approximately once every 2 weeks, and I was compelled to resort to shame tactics to persuade her to engage in it. While some of her excuses were undoubtedly valid, the majority were not. I had previously looked forward to returning home and engaging in sexual intercourse with her. I had previously initiated physical contact with her, such as back or foot massages, which involved the use of CBD oil. However, her current demeanor indicated a preference for immediate gratification. I had dinner by myself and subsequently visited a local drinking establishment, where I consumed beer while watching a sporting event. I did not return home until well after 11 p.m. I contemplated surreptitiously entering the premises, but then reconsidered, reasoning that I had not committed any wrongdoing when I passed by their bedroom. Beth opened the door, inquiring about my whereabouts. She demanded to know what I had done, implying that my actions were a business. I informed her that I had not made any calls or other contact, and that she could not hold me accountable for anything I might have done, even if I had died in a ditch. I then added, "I guess you wouldn't have had to worry about me pawing you anymore." I proceeded to insert the knife and spin. It is twice as late as I had anticipated, and I require rest. I closed the door in her face and retired to bed. I slept more soundly that night. "Will you join us for dinner tonight?" she inquired in a subdued tone. "I have not yet decided, so I am unsure how I will know. Therefore, I will make it simple: if I am here, I will eat here, and if not, I will not. Is that satisfactory? So, Steve, tell me when you are finished behaving like a child." The 21-year-old Beth, why don't you cease your current behavior and instead engage in a more constructive activity? Wait a minute. It's likely that you're already engaging in this behavior, unless you're receiving it from another source. I said, gazing directly at her. She was excellent, but not particularly adept at navigating social interactions. When I observed the expression in her eyes, it wasn't terror that prompted my accusation of infidelity. It was shock and awe, akin to having struck a nerve on the internet. You can find a vast array of information with a simple search. For instance, when I entered the search term surveillance equipment 10, a total of 1,000 products were identified through the initial search. Subsequently, the search parameters were refined to yield a manageable 100 options. The desired item, a remote surveillance camera with a recording device, was successfully located. The camera was capable of supporting up to 4 additional cameras and was equipped with an expanded memory chip, allowing for up to 5 days of recording time, which exceeded the required duration. The item was subsequently procured through a commercial transaction. I had it sent overnight to my office. The subsequent step would be challenging. Beth did not work and was responsible for the care of her 2 children, Dan, aged 7, and Amy, who had just turned 5. It would be necessary to devise a plan to remove her from the house without arousing suspicion. I ceased eating supper at home but did not venture out after 8 o'clock. The time was 10 p.m. After all, I still had to work when I returned home. I ignored her and spent time with my 2 children. I had to run to the store for a minute if it was not an inconvenience. Would you be willing to watch the children for approximately 20 minutes until I returned? I did not look at her as soon as she drove down the driveway. I exited my vehicle and proceeded to the residence. I observed that she had cameras in the kitchen, her bedroom, the basement, and outside on the back porch. I had a voice-activated recorder that I intended to place beneath the front seat of her automobile. I placed the base station in an old trunk in the attic, and the only visible component was the power line extending from it. I tested each device and returned to the living room, where the children were watching a movie. It was remarkable how small they appeared. Despite knowing the precise location of each device, I was unable to see them myself. The following few days should prove to be interesting. Are you planning to dine at Dick's Barbecue on Saturday? Beth inquired on Wednesday night. I am going with her without you, so I am indifferent to the outcome. We were part of an 8-couple neighborhood group that held a barbecue once a month at one of their homes. This week, it was Dick's turn. It was a potluck, so everyone brought something to share. Given the nature of the invitation, I was compelled to accept. On Saturday night, we went out together, but she maintained a distance from me throughout the evening. When we first started playing Coos games, I deliberately engaged in a range of behaviors too. I ensured that our team finished in last place. After viewing the tapes for 3 weeks, I noticed nothing unusual. The only noteworthy interaction was between Beth and one of her friends. I wish I had heard both sides of the argument. He has refused to sleep with me for several weeks. I did not believe he would remain alive for so long. I know I hurt his ego, but he persists in pursuing me. Mel, we are not getting divorced. It is not a catastrophic event, at least not yet. I purchased a new dress at the shopping mall yesterday that could revive a dying my partner, and I intend to surprise him tonight, but if that is unsuccessful, I will contact you tomorrow to ascertain your impressions. I was aware of her plans for tonight, however, I was uncertain about my own reaction. I will have to proceed with caution and observe the situation. She is still attempting to communicate with me. Despite my expensive technology, I was unable to find any evidence of infidelity. I have not shared the full details with her, as I did not want to disrupt my routine or influence her actions. I arrived home at 7, the time is 30 p.m. She smiled as she continued, "You are home early for a change. If you're still hungry, there's meatloaf in the fridge and an apple pie in the oven." She spoke in a casual manner, well aware that apple pie was my favorite. At approximately 8:30, she was definitely preparing a special meal. I brought 2 exhausted children upstairs to their bedrooms. I assisted them in undressing and putting them to bed while Beth cleaned the kitchen. I hugged and kissed each of them before turning off the lights. I went downstairs. I proceeded to activate the television in the living room and awaited further developments. It was not long before she was vindicated in her assertion that the ensemble would have the capacity to rouse even the most deeply slumbering. It was a monochromatic combination of jet black and fiery red, with a modicum of fabric to conceal what I deemed to be unseemly. My mind was flooded with a plethora of thoughts, but I restrained myself from expressing them in an exuberant manner. Instead, I inquired gently as to her current train of thought. I informed her of an item in the bedroom that required her attention, contingent upon her willingness to oblige. I inquired as to whether she was preoccupied or still displeased with me. I then suggested that we proceed to examine the matter in question. I informed her that I was not currently engaged in any pressing matters. She took my hand, and by the time we reached the bedroom, we were kissing. It was just as enjoyable as I had remembered. It felt good, and we engaged in sexual intercourse twice before falling asleep in each other's arms. I had a wife once again, and life was good. It was wonderful to be a couple once more. I even began preparing dinner so that she could complete her other projects. Prior to retiring for the night, we did not engage in sexual intercourse on a daily basis. However, we made a point of reserving Fridays for romantic outings. Had I not gone into the attic to disconnect the tape player, I would still be in a state of bliss. I reset the device and transported my memory card to the workplace. It was at this juncture that my world came to an abrupt end. It was the 5th day of the tape, and the day following our exceptional night together. I deleted the remaining 4 days and resolved to listen to them for mere amusement. It is likely that Beth will inform her female acquaintances of this turn of events. Regarding my actions that night, I noted that I had rocked her world. However, what I had actually heard was a conversation between one of her girlfriends and a male acquaintance. I had assumed incorrectly that it was between 2 women. I had resolved our issue the previous night. It was a relatively simple matter. Steve was unaware of the events that had transpired. I had procured the item he desired. I had aroused his interest before we even entered the bedroom. I had decided to allow him to engage in any activity he desired that night. I could hear laughter over the phone. I felt a desire to reach through the tape and strangle both of them. There is no cause for concern. I simply need to provide him with occasional gratification, which should maintain his satisfaction. I was confident that he would recognize the change, but it had been so long that he likely forgot how it felt. My goal is to ensure his continued happiness and contentment. This approach will allow us to have all the time we need. We just need to be careful not to get caught. You can keep your wife happy, and I will keep my husband happy. We can still find plenty of opportunities. Perhaps we will be able to take advantage of the upcoming Saturday cookout to engage in some leisure activities. I am always willing to accept a challenge. I must admit, I have a dinner to prepare, and the children will be home shortly. Of course, that is not entirely accurate. I gave him some the day before yesterday. I will simply inform him that I have my period. He will never know. Beth said, hanging up on him in their marriage, that she watched and listened to the tape at least 3 more times, trying to discern who was on the other end of the phone. She was certain of one thing. It was someone I knew, a friend, if you could contact that person who was hitting your wife. At least, I reset everything before I left. I reasoned to myself that even without the chip, I could obtain 12 hours on the little mainframe the unit came with. I suppose it is time to document everything again. I said, clenching my hands, that my restitution would be complete, they would wish they were never born. Of course, I had no idea what it was going to be, but I had time to consider what I was going to do. The initial action I took was to undergo a medical examination. I was concerned about the possibility of contracting an STD, as it was a significant concern at the time. However, I was relieved to find that I had not been infected. My subsequent objective was to identify the individual responsible. I recorded the names of the 7 couples we regularly socialized with. Initially, I assumed that none of them could have been involved. These individuals were close friends, with whom I had been acquainted for over 3 years. It seemed implausible that any of them would engage in such behavior. It was not feasible that the culprit was a male, but it was indeed our next-door neighbors. Dick and his wife were a typical suburban couple in their early 30s, as similar to us as could be. They appeared content. Dick was undoubtedly my closest friend, and he held a great deal of affection for Beth. However, it might have been excessive. I began to believe that Mary and Ron were the oldest in our group. They were both in their late 40s, with Ron's heart condition, and they were both aware of his romantic interest in Beth. I removed them from my list. I then considered Sue and Carl and began to. It is possible that Carl may be a suspect, but it is important to note that they were on a cruise at the time of the call to Beth. It is unlikely that he was calling from the cruise ship, which seems implausible. He was also absent. Sonia and Jerome are the newest members of our group. They relocated to our neighborhood from Chicago approximately 3 years ago. He was a sales representative for a pharmaceutical business and was often on the road. We have known Betty and Andy for approximately 5 years. Betty was responsible for monitoring Andy and her social gatherings. Due to his proclivity for consuming alcohol, he required assistance on numerous occasions to ensure his safe return home. He engaged in flirtatious behavior with the female attendees, a common practice among many men. I contemplated maintaining his inclusion on the list, but I reasoned that his inebriated state would likely impair his performance in bed. However, I was uncertain about how he would behave when he regained his faculties. Consequently, I decided to retain him on the list. Vicky and Mike were not among the couples with whom I was previously acquainted. They were still in the nascent stages of their marriage, even after 6 years. We were repeatedly informed that we would be responsible for hosting the 2 of them. They engaged in sexual contact or became overly friendly in the hot tub at one of the residences. I envied the 2 of them. Beth and I had been married for 9 years, but we behaved as if we had been married for 50. At least, that was the impression I got from her. I did not hesitate to include Chris on my list. Donna and Chris were lovely, but we were somewhat distant at times. They had money and enjoyed showing it off on more than one occasion. I had to refrain from responding to anything Chris did or said. He was a particularly verbose individual. However, Beth appeared to be quite fond of him. It seemed as though she was drawn to his affluence. Donna and Chris, on the other hand, seemed to lack a certain connection, which might have contributed to the difficulties they were experiencing. As I perused the list, I noticed Chris's name, which I had circled. I was surprised to see 3 names on the list, including one that I had not expected to see. Jake was my closest friend, but I had heard stories about best friends betraying their partners. Andy was not an option. I contemplated this further, and Chris said that he would be interested. However, the timing was not yet right, as our vacation was only a week away. A monthly outing was scheduled, and it was necessary to ascertain further information about each. "Steve, will you still have Carl paint the other 2 rooms upstairs?" Beth inquired when I arrived home from work. I believe we took advantage of him the last time he renovated the other 2 bedrooms. He charged me for paint and a case of beer, which was all I did. The slip fees for the couple of $100 before they go on their cruise were not itemized. I reminded her that friendship was one thing, but business was business. Let me think about it. There is no great rush with the children's rooms are present, so a cookout is forthcoming, and the house should appear aesthetically pleasing. The house always appears well maintained. Who will inspect the paint on her walls? Steve, this is a matter for the ladies. It is an unwise decision. I muttered this beneath my breath. She will have more concerns than paint once I determine who she is dealing with. I kept a close eye on every single the male attendee. Andy was consuming beer at a rapid pace and assisting Beth in arranging food on the deck tables. Chris was exhibiting his characteristic behavior, and if I correctly interpreted Beth's body language, she was disinterested in his boasts about his financial success on Apple computer stock. Carl was no longer a primary suspect, as he had seemed to be putting on a front. Furthermore, Andy seemed to be questioning the viability of the choices that had been made. This left my acquaintance, Dick, as the primary suspect. After the party, Dick remained to assist with the cleanup. I inquired about Dick's experience at the party. He replied that everyone had enjoyed themselves, particularly Andy. Dick responded with a snicker after his third beer. Betty then warned him not to become intoxicated again. On that night, he was dozing on the sofa. It appeared that he had nursed his last beer for approximately 2 hours. We both laughed, and then Dick spoke, looking around to ensure that no one was in hearing distance. "Steve," he said, "can you keep a significant secret from Beth?" I nodded. "I plan to take my wife on a second honeymoon," I replied. "We first got married. We didn't have any money, so we remained in a motel for the long weekend. I've scheduled a 7-day cruise for us, which leaves in 2 weeks. We are planning a day cruise, which will take place in 2 weeks. I have not yet informed my wife of this plan, but I have informed her manager about the situation so that she can take time off." I was perplexed by his words. In my mind, he had already advanced to the top position and was now discussing taking his wife on a second honeymoon. "Steve, I am relying on you to take care of my house while I am away. Her mother is going to watch if you could just glance in once or twice, I'd appreciate it. She'll be displeased to learn that he spoke with a wide grin. We might not even get out of our hotel, but at least I managed to reserve a room with a balcony, so we'll be able to tour some of the local sites. I spoke with your dog. How long have you been planning this trip?" "I've been saving for over 6 months. I nearly made the trip when Sue and Carl went on theirs." Furthermore, Sue expressed her envy of their good fortune. She contacted me via her mobile phone and sent me an image of the Mexican pyramids. I was overcome with laughter at the thought of her and Dick nearly spoiling my surprise. Dick's name is Steve, by the way. If you believe I will engage in such an action, I must inform you that I am unlikely to do so. I intend to be occupied with other tasks. If you comprehend my meaning, I will not be offended if you label me as unintelligent. As I proceeded to cross Dick off the list, I realized that he was not a suitable candidate from the beginning. This left Andy and Chris, who seemed to be unlikely selections. I was perplexed by Beth's involvement. The time is 00 a.m. The realization eventually occurred to me that Carl was the result of combining 2 ideas. He was a self-employed painter who set his own hours. His wife worked in an office, allowing him to come and go as he wanted. Carl was an employed painter who set his own hours. His wife worked in an office, allowing him to come and go as he wanted. Beth did not work, so they could meet during the day without arousing suspicion. It is probable that the relationship began when he painted their upstairs bedroom 6 months ago. It is likely that Beth was involved, given that she was in bed at the time. As I considered the situation further, it became increasingly serious. I was reluctant to face legal consequences, so I informed the children should consider Beth. Now that I reflect further, why don't we engage Carl to paint the remaining 2 rooms in this style? The entire upstairs will be completed if you are agreeable. Could you kindly contact him and arrange the details? However, it is essential to inform him from the outset that I intend to remunerate him for his efforts. I informed Beth when I called her from the office that we might even recarpet those rooms while we're at it. "Steve, we must proceed gradually. We are not in a position to do otherwise. Given our current financial situation, it would be prudent to complete the wall before considering floor coverings. I concede that your perspective is valid. I am unsure what I would do without your input. Despite my initial inclination to disagree, I recognize the value in your observation. You were indeed fortunate to have me 2 days later, when I was able to listen in on their conversation. I am intrigued to learn that Steve has requested that you paint the remaining 2 bedrooms upstairs. Beth mentioned this to Carl. I responded, I assume you intend to remunerate me in the same manner as you did previously. I am prepared to accept that, but this time there will be no need to engage in any form of deceit. It will be beneficial to no longer have to resort to clandestine activities. You are welcome to visit after the children have departed for their educational establishments, and we can take as much time as we require. I derive a certain degree of pleasure from engaging in sexual intercourse with you in my bed. It evokes a sense of mischief when Steve and I engage in such activities on the same sheets. She laughed, but Beth, I would be grateful if you could remember that. I still need to paint the rooms. It is unclear how long this endeavor will take. It could take a few hours or more. I intend to make this endeavor last at least a week. We have never done it for 3 days in a row before. Beth, I still need to work for a living. I cannot come over every day and give you the meat. Why don't you ask your husband to pick up some slack? He is useless and very predictable. Beth, you are aware of this. Just remember that I am your. It is important to recall that they ultimately terminated the relationship. I was on the verge of vomiting. It was time to devise a strategy that would significantly impact both individuals. Carl would be relatively simple to target. I would send a video to his wife, which would result in him paying for the remainder of his life. However, I desired more than that from 2 individuals who had engaged in infidelity. They had made me a laughingstock, and I wanted them to experience the pain associated with their actions on a regular basis. A pound of flesh, if I had simply divorced Beth. Even if she had been unfaithful, she was likely to receive the majority of the assets. 3 or 4 times that meant she would retain custody of the children and I would be responsible for supporting her for the next 13 years while she continued to engage in extramarital relationships. A bullet to the head would have been an effective solution, but I was not willing to take that course of action. Therefore, I needed to find a solution that would be less extreme but equally effective. Beth complained about her cramps and took 3 Tylenol. It is possible that they would have allowed. I suggest we purchase a more potent over-the-counter medication to treat these cramps. Perhaps you should consult a physician and obtain a stronger medication. I attempted that course of action, but the physician merely prescribed additional aspirin. If he possessed a uterus, he might comprehend the challenges we face monthly. She commented, leaning against the restroom stall. She had provided me with an idea, but I was uncertain how to implement it. Nevertheless, I would devise a solution. There was one area in town that no God-fearing self, a respectable individual made the trip, unless one was seeking to purchase items. That was the extent of the venture. I utilized my old work truck and made the journey, attired in a tattered shirt and jeans. I was uncertain of my objective, yet I had a reasonable understanding of what I sought. I presumed I would have to identify an individual who possessed the requisite knowledge. I proceeded to engage in conversation with a sex worker on the street. She inquired as to whether I was a police officer, to which I responded that I did not resemble such a person. She then proceeded to offer me a price breakdown for her services while chewing gum. I subsequently inquired as to the availability of marijuana and cocaine. She was taken aback by my apparent lack of knowledge regarding such substances. I surmise that the item is intended for my wife, not me. She asserts that when she is under the influence of the substance, sexual intercourse is markedly more pleasurable. I intend to procure a few items and we can test them out for a second time. I anticipated that she would flee from the vehicle. At the very least, there was sufficient quantity to allow for a preliminary trial. I informed her that I typically do not engage in such activities, but if you provide an additional $50, I may be able to assist you in procuring the desired substances. She proceeded to light a small joint, which she had previously requested, and handed it to me. She then inquired about my medical history, noting that asthma was a potential concern. She emphasized that the substances in question would likely have a detrimental effect on my health. She then presented me with a set of instructions, which I followed by providing her with $50 and a $20 bill. Subsequently, approximately 5 minutes later, we arrived at the location behind the residence. The structure was essentially a collapsed shack. I was instructed to obtain $200 and wait at the designated location. I was to keep the windows up and the doors locked in the event that someone approached the window. If the individual produced a firearm, I was to handle the situation independently. I realized that I was in a compromising position. Despite the potential consequences, I proceeded with the transaction. I implored her to expedite the process. I reassured her that I was not intending to renege on the agreement. She exited the premises through the door, and I could not help but observe the lengthy interval that seemed to pass before she returned. I was on the verge of assuming that she had departed through the front entrance, leaving me to fend for myself. I exhaled in relief. "Drive," she murmured, gazing around. "I've got you covered. I'll get you 3 rocks of crack and 3 joints." She beamed. "It'll cost you an additional $20, but you said," I was about to say something but changed my mind. I paid her, and she gave me the items. We both achieved our respective objectives from the transaction. I placed the items in a plastic bag beneath the seat. I drove with heightened caution the entire way back to work, switching vehicles and attire. With the proceeds from the sale on their way back to me, I planned to exact retribution on both of them. I devised a two-pronged approach. I would first finish Carl and then return to retrieve Beth once she felt safe on her way home from work. On Thursday, I picked up a prepaid cell phone. I felt that if I arrived early enough, I could catch him before he went. I disassembled one of his tail lights and stored the 3 joints in a bag beneath the seat. I then stepped into the kitchen while he was drinking one of my beers. Carl and Beth engaged in conversation over beer. Carl inquired about Beth's employment status, seeking to identify any potential warning signs she might be exhibiting. He stated that he would be finished with the task by the following night, requiring only a quick stop at Home Depot for additional trim paint. "Fetch you another," I said. "I will get one for both of us." I reminded him that I would be paying him in cash this time. I handed him $320 bills and informed him that I would give him the remainder the following day. I spent some of the money on the drive home, but I believe I am prepared for it. I replied with a smile. We had the air conditioning on when he left. I fabricated an excuse, claiming that I had forgotten to procure an item from the establishment and would be returning shortly. I expressed gratitude to Carl for his assistance and proceeded to depart. As I traversed the thoroughfare, he overtook me and proceeded into the primary thoroughfare. "What is the nature of your emergency?" the operator inquired. "In this area, there is a male individual operating a white pickup truck." I informed him that he was peddling narcotics to children and asked him to leave. However, he replied that he could sell the drugs wherever he wanted. "I have him in front of me right now, and we are driving down Main Street, just beyond Marshall. His license number is DL5512. As I previously stated, it is a white Chevrolet with a broken right tail light." I terminated the call and awaited further developments. We proceeded to drive for an extended period until I recognized that my initial strategy was untenable. Just 1 block before the Home Depot exit, a police officer initiated a traffic stop, and another followed closely behind. The first officer approached Carl's vehicle and, I believe, mentioned the damaged tail light. Carl exited the vehicle, and the officers he proceeded to walk to the rear of his pickup truck. The second police officer produced a dog, which prompted me to assume that he had nothing to hide. Carl then unlocked the door to his truck, presumably to allow the officers to conduct a search of his vehicle. The police dogs were highly effective, and they located the marijuana within approximately 1 minute. I was extremely pleased when they handcuffed Carl. Carl was then taken into custody and transported to the police vehicle. I had observed the entirety of the incident and was gratified to see the outcome. I proceeded to depart for my residence. While Carl's name did not appear in the news reports, his image was posted on the county arrest website. It is noteworthy that a considerable number of individuals dedicate their leisure time to online research, particularly when it comes to matters of public interest. The incident was widely reported in the local news, particularly given the charges of cocaine possession and distribution. I was confident that the possession charge would be upheld, but I believed that the distribution charge would be difficult to prove with only 3 joints in question. However, he did have the $300 in cash that I had provided. By the conclusion of the proceedings, I was gratified to observe that Carl had been incarcerated for a period commensurate with the gravity of his offenses. However, the objective of achieving maximum exposure for the sake of deterrence had been achieved. Should there be any further assistance I can provide, I would be grateful if you would let me know. I informed her that I was astonished that such an incident had occurred. I had last seen Carl when he and Beth were hosting a beer garden when I arrived home early that day. I was previously unaware that Carl had a history of cannabis use. He has stated that the substance was not his, yet the vehicle in question was registered to him. I am not so naive as to believe this claim. I had assumed that he would have completed his work at your residence by Wednesday. There are times when I find his behavior difficult to comprehend. She spoke with great passion on the matter. Should you require any assistance, you know where I live. She thanked me once more. Carl was the subject of much ridicule, jokes and conversation at our next gathering. Sue did not appear either, which I did not blame her for. It was there that I spent the entire night executing the second step of my plan. I added crack powder to Beth's drink. I made sure there was enough alcohol in them so she would not notice the difference when I told her I had. She had forgotten the salad I had prepared, and she became enraged, particularly given that I informed her that I was too inebriated to drive. I apologized. Honey, let me get your pocketbook and keys. I made this remark as I entered Betty and Andy's bedroom, which contained coats and other items. I dropped the 2 vials with the last 2 rocks of crack were then taken outside to return her keys and pocketbook. Steve, you are indebted to me for this. When we return home, I expect to receive compensation commensurate with the value of the services I have provided. She said, reaching for her purse, that there was only one way to get home from Betty and Andy. As soon as she drove down the driveway, I did so as well. I contacted the emergency services number once more. I was informed that my call was not an emergency. However, I was able to provide the following information. A woman driving a dark blue Toyota was driving erratically down Wilmore Street. She had cut me off and knocked down 2 mailboxes, nearly striking my children. I was unsure as to whether she was under the influence of alcohol or drugs. I was advised to contact the police. I terminated the call and destroyed the phone. I then attempted to contact Betty, but she was unavailable. I inquired about her whereabouts via telephone and house phone. It has been more than an hour, and I am concerned for her safety. I hope she has not been involved in an accident. Steve, why don't I drive you home while Andy searches for her? Perhaps she merely misplaced her phone when trapped somewhere. Let us see if we can find her. Betty and I arrived at a dark house. I accessed the residence with my spare key and discovered the salad dish on the kitchen counter, where I had left it. I postulated that she had not reached her domicile while Betty consulted with Andy. I observed a blinking light on her answering machine. The initial message originated from my parents, who stated that they would be transporting my children until 9 o'clock. Since they were going out to eat, the second message came from Beth. There was a great deal of distress expressed, with calls for me to come and assist. The reason given was that she had been arrested for driving under the influence and for possessing crack cocaine. Betty has also been arrested for possession of narcotics. I was incredulous. I asked how this could be. Beth does not use drugs. What is the rationale behind this decision? Steve, where are your children currently located? I am currently at my mother's residence. Would it be more beneficial for you to contact her and request that she maintain custody of the children while you and I proceed to the station to address this situation? I proceeded to make the call, and we subsequently departed. I was perplexed by the series of events that had transpired. First, Carl, and now Beth. What could have possibly motivated her to engage in such behavior? I had never observed her consuming any illicit substances. Despite her expressed desire for a stronger medication to relieve her monthly discomfort, she had obtained a substance that was more potent than aspirin. Beth was being held captive, and it would take me 24 hours to free her. Beth, why have you resorted to drugs? Did Carl influence you in this decision? How could you do this to us? I spoke loudly enough for Betty to hear. Steve, I assure you that I am not using drugs. I am uncertain how they got into my handbag. It seems that someone must have placed them there. Beth, you can see that one of our acquaintances at the party planted cocaine on you. Do you truly expect me to believe that you are innocent? I will not be able to assist you until it would be prudent to obtain the cash from the bank. You would be well advised to consider your actions and provide answers by Monday. I informed her in a tone of voice that indicated I was angry. Steve, I urge you to listen to me. I do not use drugs. You must believe me. Do you believe I would lie to you? You must not lie to me, Beth. If you do, there will be consequences. I am going to have Betty drive me home so I can pick up the kids from their mother. I will collect the children from their mother, and I request that you do not worry. I have informed Betty, who is the only person aware of your incarceration. My mother returned with the children, and I informed her that Beth had been arrested for drug possession. She initially appeared to doubt my sincerity, but I confirmed that I was being entirely serious. She has been acting in a peculiar manner for some time. It is possible that I am unaware of or have not been made aware of certain information. I informed her that I was aware of Steve's relationship with Beth and that I believed there had been a significant misunderstanding. However, this was not the case. I took care of that when the children were asleep. I viewed this week's recording and found that it corroborated my suspicions. Carl and Beth were indeed engaged in an affair, and the sexual content of their interactions was particularly disturbing. I could only bear to watch for so long, particularly after she implored him to engage in acts she described as utterly repugnant. I made 3 copies of the tape before retiring for the night. My mother offered to watch the children until Beth was released from custody. I proceeded to my place of employment and met with my superior. I provided him with the 2, a brief overview was provided, indicating that a potential divorce from Beth was a likely outcome. The recommendation was made to take as much time as necessary and not to concern oneself with employment, as it would remain secure upon return. The behavior of lawyers can be compared to that of sharks, particularly when there is competition in the field. A comprehensive review was conducted, beginning with the initial pickup and subsequent delivery of the tape to him. This material was removed from the security system in our residence. The level of astonishment experienced upon examination of I reviewed the tapes to ascertain whether there was any evidence of Beth engaging in drug use. When I discovered she was having an affair with the husband of one of our close friends, Steve, I was astonished. He informed me that I simply wanted it done and over with. My objective is to gain custody of my children and to avoid paying alimony to a person who has been unfaithful. I am confident that I will prevail. What is his name? He consulted his notes. Carl's wife is preparing to. I have not yet spoken with Sue, but I could inquire as to her interest in such an arrangement. If she is amenable, I would be willing to offer a 20% discount. I can present the same evidence, and we can proceed with both simultaneously. He provided me with his contact information, and I assured him I would contact her. My next destination was at Beth's parents' residence. June and Hank were affable individuals, despite their daughter's involvement with Steve. "What are you doing here? I should be at work, shouldn't I?" June inquired. "I need to speak with you both." I informed them of the arrest, provided them with a copy of the tape, and stated my intention to divorce their daughter. "Steve, I urge you to consider counseling or some other form of assistance. It is evident that you are in love with each other and that this situation will require time to resolve." Hank pleaded with me to examine the footage and determine whether this is your wife. "Can you forgive her?" "I am unable to do so, and I believe you will concur. I do not intend to bail her out of jail. Her bail amount is $33. I have taken money from my savings to cover the cost, which is $33,000. I informed her that I do not want her back ever and that I would drop off her belongings tomorrow morning. I would prefer that she was not present when I do so. He understood my decision to change the locks, separate our savings and checking accounts, and finally pack her clothes. I spent the majority of the day with my mother picking up the kids from school and driving them home for dinner. This allowed me time to put my last strategy into action. I opened a cold one and grabbed my phone. I called Sue. "I would like to begin by requesting a private conversation with you, Steve, if it is convenient." "Sue, I am currently preparing to join you for dinner." "Steve, I would be grateful for approximately an hour of your time." "What is the purpose of this meeting?" "I would prefer not to discuss this matter via telephone. I will arrive at approximately 8 p.m. Is that convenient?" "I will wait for you." She informed me that she had to leave but would see me later. "What is so urgent that we had to do it tonight?" Sue Beth was arrested on Saturday night for possession of cocaine. On Sunday, I commenced an examination of the security footage from our residence to ascertain whether I could observe you using narcotics. In the course of this examination, I made an additional discovery. I then guided her into the living room and turned on her DVD, awaiting her reaction. She uttered only one word as she watched, "Oh my God." I then observed her husband engaging in sexual intercourse with my wife. I paused the tape for 30 seconds, after which I saw her appear astonished. This was because I was the individual who had been unfaithful and had been caught. I then assumed that everything was returning to normal. "I simply wanted to inform you that I had made you a copy of the tape." I said this, ejecting the tape and passing it to her after the first 20 minutes. After a few minutes, I turned off the television. I was unable to continue watching the footage. I informed Beth of my intention to divorce her and scheduled a meeting with an attorney later that afternoon. During the meeting, I provided the attorney with a copy of the video and informed him of my intention to pursue legal action. He offered Beth a 20% discount if she were interested in settling the matter out of court, but she did not respond. I do not believe that I want to cause Sue distress. During the course of the conversation, there was a considerable amount of profanity directed at Beth. I found myself in agreement with her sentiments. She inquired as to whether I had consumed any beverage, requesting that I specify whether it was beer, wine, or something stronger. She then suggested that there was something amiss, although she was unable to discern precisely what it was. I now comprehend why he was so enthusiastic when you engaged him to paint those rooms. She then proceeded to consume the remainder of her beverage, concluding with a vocal outburst. My legal counsel has advised me to exercise caution and refrain from any further involvement with the individual in question while I am in a state of heightened emotional distress. He has expressed concern over the potential consequences of my actions and has recommended that I contact the authorities and request his removal, citing the safety of myself and others as the primary reason for this course of action. He had the audacity to strike me, but your assessment is likely accurate. We conversed for the next 45 minutes. I empathized with Sue and her daughter, not with Carl. Sue contacted the police and relayed the situation. They assured her that they would dispatch assistance within 20 minutes. I expressed my regret to Sue and advised her not to dwell on the incident. "We are not the ones who are walking around," she explained, looking at my lawyer's card. "I will take up his offer and call him tomorrow." "Are you safe to drive?" I asked. "I am fine, but I know someone who will not be available in 10 minutes. I anticipate that he will admonish him severely." I delivered Beth's clothes on Tuesday morning. Her mother was at the jail, providing her with financial assistance as we transferred the 12 garbage bags of clothes into the garage. Steve stated, "I observed 2 minutes of the video and you were correct. I would not have her back either. I have no desire for her to remain in my presence, yet she has no alternative accommodation." I expressed my gratitude and took my leave. 3 hours later, Beth departed, leaving a series of calls on both my home phone and my cell phone. I listened to a few of them, but they all seemed similar. "I apologize. Carl seduced me, and it was not through my." She requested forgiveness for her actions, but it was not granted. Sue evicted Carl and obtained a restraining order, preventing him from accessing his personal belongings, including his bank account. However, he managed to withdraw approximately 75% of the funds before Sue could act. We consulted with our attorney and signed the necessary documents. The documents were jointly drafted, and the other party assured us that we would be able to acquire all we asked for. Carl did not contest the terms. He realized he was in a disadvantageous position and therefore signed over all his assets to Sue. Beth, however, resisted this arrangement. She requested custody and assistance, but after some persuasion, her lawyer advised her to abandon this request. I granted her visitation rights but not overnight stays for 5 months. The relationship between Sue and me did not progress beyond this point, but we remain on good terms. I still receive calls from my ex. I choose to ignore them. I intend to seek treatment to calm my nerves and plan for the future. The following day, I awoke from my hangover with the following thoughts: how could she have done this to me? How could she have done this to her family? I am Jonathan Fremont. Up until last night, I believed my wife, Susan Fremont, to be my beloved wife, my real love. However, it turns out she is a wonderful wife, at least in practice. That is, she is wonderful with her sweetheart, but not with me. She claims she has been cheating on me for nearly a year. I was compelled to accept this situation, but I was unable to do so. I experienced a surge of anger as I reflected on her statements from the previous night. She expressed her love for both me and her lover. She planned to spend additional time with him overnight, and I would have no involvement in that decision. She also mentioned that he was a divorce lawyer. Furthermore, she asserted that he was her divorce lawyer. If I did not comply with her demands, I was aware that it would constitute a significant conflict of interest, which would ultimately result in his disbarment. I briefly smiled, but then the expression vanished. I remained uncertain about the identity of this individual. Susan was unable to obtain the information from her. I contemplated inflicting harm upon the unfaithful 304 for a moment before refocusing my attention on my children. She is their mother, and I am unwilling to inflict such suffering upon her. I revisit the details of the scenario. If I did not adhere to her rules, I was on the verge of losing the financial support she was receiving, which was being provided by me. I decided to forego any further consideration of the matter. My friend had experienced a divorce, and one night at the pub, he informed us of his strategy for coping with the situation. He had removed all of his financial accounts and opened new ones. In the case of the individual in question, he left his adulterous wife with no financial resources to retain legal counsel. He ultimately opted to pursue legal representation, despite the counsel's recommendation. This decision proved to be disadvantageous for him, resulting in a significant financial loss. The settlement awarded him half of the marital assets, in accordance with the state's no-fault divorce legislation. However, alimony was not granted. The primary distinction was that he did not have children, which meant that he would be required to pay child support. Based on the information available to me, it seems that she was not taking him to her residence, but rather heading to his. I decided to verify this information and contacted my mother. "Good day, Jonathan. How are you doing? Would you like to speak with the children?" My mother-in-law the law inquired of a lovely lady. I was pondering how much awareness she had of her daughter's infidelity. It was likely minimal. I was contemplating the frequency of her viewing of Rugrats. I inquired 3 or 4 times per week, generally between the hours of 8 and 5. Susan, who volunteers at a homeless shelter and a food bank, stated that she was deceiving her own parents. I thanked her. I informed her that I only wanted to know so that I could surprise her next week. I advised her not to inform her. She responded with a chuckle and stated, "Oh, don't worry, Mom's the word." I conveyed my sincerity with feigned enthusiasm. She seemed to accept my explanation. I thanked her and said, "I will talk to you later." I ended the call. I then looked in the mirror. I was not going completely bald. I still had more hair than Christopher Maloney. The hair loss had begun to fade, but it was still manageable. I shaved and combed my hair. I had more than Detective Stabler on SVU. I needed to address the beer gut as much as she had said to wound me the night before. She was correct about that. How could I let myself go like this? I had been working 60 hours a week to provide for my wonderful children and my cheating wife. I loved the kids, but I did not love my wife. I proceeded to cancel all of our shared credit cards and open new ones in my name exclusively. I then contacted my branch manager and requested that he transfer all funds from our joint savings account to a checking account in my name. I also terminated automatic bill payments. It is evident that my wife holds me in such low regard that she has resorted to falsehoods in her divorce proceedings. She has, in fact, declared war on me. However, her lawyer friend has provided her with advice on how to proceed. It is clear that lawyers employ similar tactics to those used by the police, namely, intimidation and fear, in order to deter ordinary people from fighting back. The police do this when they know that the individual has a legitimate complaint against them. Lawyers have also resorted to such tactics in order to secure an out-of-court settlement. It is evident that both parties have underestimated me. I may be a diesel mechanic, but that does not make me stupid. Despite having served for 4 years in the Army Sea, I had the option of pursuing a career in law enforcement or private investigation. However, I ultimately opted to continue working on engines, particularly diesel engines, which constituted my area of expertise, even as a self-taught mechanic. Upon becoming a qualified diesel technician, I was able to secure a lucrative position that offered significant overtime. I engaged in physical exercise, namely jogging, in order to clear my mind. I wore sweatpants, not my usual attire, in order to facilitate this. Additionally, I engaged in this exercise with the intention of losing weight, specifically the excess fat around my abdomen. After my exercise, I contacted my employer to inform him that I would be taking a few weeks off to address a family matter. He expressed approval of my decision. I needed to refine my plan of action. It was going to be intense, with a high probability of violence. I understood that I was at a significant risk of ending up in jail once the dust had settled. I wanted to avoid it, of course. Having worked in this field, I had the necessary expertise to pull it off. However, it would still be challenging. It was time to act. To shop, I showered, dressed in clean clothes, and then went out. Winter was approaching, so I procured some soft, supple gloves, a black turtleneck, and a ski mask devoid of a mouth hole. Additionally, I obtained some Oakley shades with a matte gray front and matte black frames. Walmart was my source for these items. I was going to have a lot of fun once I figured out who the jerk was. Once I had identified the individual in question, I proceeded to our local spice shop and purchased a pair of voice-activated recorders and a GPS device with long-life batteries. I had initially considered cameras, but ultimately determined that they were unnecessary at this juncture. Additionally, I procured a gym bag to store my new equipment and a pair of matte black steel-toed work boots. I also purchased boots, which was a logical decision given that my previous work boots were no longer functional. The new boots would effectively replace the old ones. I visited a sporting goods store and purchased an aluminum baseball bat and a large gym bag. I decided to purchase a sports bra for my abdomen, in case I did not want to be identified. It was imperative that I be able to identify myself based on my intuition. I made sure to pay for everything in cash to avoid leaving a paper trail from a credit card that could lead back to me. The most challenging aspect was portraying the image of a submissive husband when my unfaithful wife returned home. I was gratified to find that I was not immediately inclined to surrender. Susan is aware of my proclivity for tenacity, and I had spent the day outside, remaining until the establishment's closing time. I was reluctant to allow her to assume that no developments had occurred. Upon entering the house, I discovered that she had not yet arrived. I decided to proceed with my plan of action. I attempted to contact her via her cellular telephone, but it was inoperable. I proceeded to leave her a note indicating the urgency of the matter and requesting that she contact me at the earliest convenience. I provided her with the pertinent time and date and instructed her to contact me without delay. It was now time to employ a degree of psychological manipulation. She did, in fact, contact me 2 hours later, and the children were "Jonathan, what is going on?" she inquired in a concerned tone. I opted to sound somewhat disoriented and replied, "Come home, Susan. I need to discuss the situation regarding the children." I remained awake for a considerable period before terminating the call. Susan arrived at our residence shortly thereafter, entering the room from the garage with haste. I contacted her and observed that my complexion was unusually pale. I inquired about the whereabouts of the children. She responded with a tone of concern, asking about their safety. I responded with a tone of disinterest, stating that I was preoccupied with another romantic interest. My words conveyed a sense of detachment, while my eyes betrayed a hint of malice. Filled with loathing, I informed her that although the marriage had ended, I was going to cause her significant physical harm before all was over. "Susan, your phone was turned off for 2 hours after I arrived home from work and contacted you. What if the children were hurt? So what happens next? Is he more important to you than your children, Susan?" She sank onto the living room couch, holding her face in her hands and sobbing pitifully. I inquired in a hushed tone of voice whether she would care as much if it had been the children who had been killed instead of me. Would she care at all, or would she simply phone her parents and ask them to keep the kids longer so that she could spend even additional time with your romantic interest, she said, glancing up at me. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was unwavering in her conviction that it was not the case. "Jonathan, you know it is not like that," she sobbed. "I cannot believe you would do that to me. I cannot believe you would use your own children as weapons against me." I slowly shook my head. "I did not do this to you. Susan, you have only yourself to blame for becoming involved with your boyfriend. I miss my wife, and the children miss their mother," I said, maintaining a quiet tone of voice. "Even though they adore their grandparents, they love you more." This caused her to pale slightly, but she was aware that I was correct, even if she was reluctant to admit it. She was too proud to admit the truth, so she said, "Since they're all right, I'll go back after my shower." She glared at me, and I thought, just remember that you tried to divorce me. I'll leave you ruined and broken. I was certain there was a God. She then returned to her bedroom to shower in the master bath. I acted quickly, taking the GPS and one of the voice-activated recorders. I then proceeded to place the voice-activated recorder on her vehicle's seat and the GPS device underneath the passenger seat. I had both receivers with me to enable me to ascertain her movements and conversations, whether she was on the telephone or engaged in monologue. The signal range was approximately 10 miles. It would be necessary for me to be situated on the complete opposite side for the signal to be lost. From the moment she called until she arrived, he did not live at the far end of the city. That individual's reckoning was imminent, following the planting of the devices and the testing of the receivers. I then placed the voice receiver in my pocket. Subsequently, I installed the GPS receiver in my Ford F-250 diesel. I am particularly fond of that antique truck. I was inside sitting with my head in my hands when Susan emerged from the vehicle. She was dressed in a manner that could be perceived as being in alignment with the concept of killing someone. I looked up to her and began to plead with her. "Susan, I implore you to reconsider your actions. I beseech you to refrain from doing this to yourself and to your family." Her expression appeared to relax. "I apologize for what I am about to do," she said. "I must profess a certain bewilderment, my dear. I genuinely love you, but he needs me," she explained, her expression betraying a hint of sheepishness as she offered me a weak grin. "Susan, if you were truly sorry, you would not go. You would remain a faithful wife, rather than engaging in an illicit affair with someone who was not your husband," I replied, my tone firm and assertive. Susan pleaded, repeating her words. "Your family needs you." I stressed, "Do you no longer care about me or her children? The 3 offspring born from her love for each other represent the best of both of us. We created them together. Right now, I'll promise it tomorrow. I am all yours," she smiled, as if it would make everything better. It's time to play the part one had been psyching myself up for this. "Okay, but I do not like this." She shook her head in resignation and sighed in defeat. Her triumphant expression suddenly gave way to a contemptuous smirk. "Do not be concerned, my dear. I hold you in high regard and will always be yours. This is merely a transient situation," she replied. "As I have already stated, it will take some time before I am at ease with you undertaking this task," Susan continued, as she approached the garage. "This is only a temporary arrangement," I reassured myself. "It will be until the lover. Once the boy was dealt with, it would be interesting to see how she would react to him once I was done." As soon as she left, I went to get my aluminum baseball bat, an ancient Bowie knife, and a blowtorch. I was pleased as I climbed into the cab of my Ford and activated the GPS and voice receivers. She had the radio on, and I could hear her singing a pleasant melody accompanied this action. I then placed the torch in a tidy manner inside the gym bag, thereby providing her with a 5-minute head start. I observed on the GPS that she was situated a mere few miles away, so I proceeded to start my vehicle and drive over to her location. I drove up to the house where she had just parked her car in his garage. She even had a garage door opener for his residence. I was overcome with a sense of rage, but I took deep breaths to maintain control. I was driven to the point of wanting to physically assault him and her, if she were in the way. However, I was able to obtain his license plate number and promptly record it. I always carry a pen and a small notebook with me for such purposes. I also carried a pen and a small notebook. In addition, I noted the address, which I had developed into a routine while serving in the Army. This would necessitate careful planning. I then checked that my equipment was properly organized. I entered the back of the vehicle and changed into my redneck ninja attire. As I contemplated, I donned the girdle to disguise my abdomen and donned gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints on the sweater. I put on my black jeans and donned the ski mask. Tonight would only be reconnaissance, tomorrow would be a different situation. I then drove around to the mouth of the alley behind the houses I had reached. I proceeded to stop a few houses down from the lovers' lads and exited in a silent manner. I left the bat in the cab and traversed the alleyway in a stealthy manner. Thus far, no issues have been encountered. I maintained visual vigilance for any potential alarm systems and observed none. I proceeded with caution, moving in a low, rapid manner to the nearest window. There was light visible within. However, the lack of light outside would also be advantageous. I paused just beneath the window and peered over the sill. What I saw caused my blood to boil. The man sat there rubbing himself while my wife performed a brief striptease. I was pleased I had not brought the bat with me. Maguire's impression was that he would have shattered the window pane and fractured the assailant's skull. He took several deep breaths to calm himself, listening intently for any clues regarding the assailant's identity. "That's it, baby." He greatly enjoyed it when the other person danced for him. Did the other person enjoy dancing for him? Did he enjoy being danced for? Did he enjoy being danced for in that way? He had to keep. I was tempted to return to my vehicle and retrieve my bat. I was gratified to hear him say, "You are so attractive, Susan," in a tone that indicated he was free of guilt and facing no difficulties. I realized she was lying, so I asked, "Are you, Jim?" She responded with a giggle. I surmised that he would soon regret his actions. I had already gathered sufficient information about Susan Fremont, and I decided to leave before engaging in any potentially misguided actions. I had reached my limit with that woman. I would not resort to physical violence against her, but her partner was another matter. He had deliberately set out to seduce my wife, despite her marital status. He had willingly and intentionally betrayed me. He had somehow corrupted Susan's iron will. He was dangerous, and I was determined that he never did it to anyone else's wife. Upon my return to the cab, I changed out of my sweater, black trousers, and ski mask with Oakley sunglasses into a surprisingly comfortable sports girdle that made my beard disappear. I put on my regular blue pants and a t-shirt. I proceeded to don my shirt and boots. I then initiated the startup sequence for my vehicle and departed the scene. I was unharmed. I had acquired the name of the individual in question and would be able to conduct a search of his name in the morning. I entered my residence and retrieved my lockpicks from the nightstand, having saved them since my time in C. I was certain they would prove useful at some point. I contacted my mother and inquired as to whether she would prefer for the children to remain overnight. She indicated that she missed her grandchildren, so I offered to bring them by the following morning for her to watch. I then contacted Susan's parents to inform them that I would be picking up the children later in the morning. Their grandchildren were relieved that I would be picking them up and transporting them to my mother's house. I packed a suitcase with some of my clothing and underwear and placed it in my wardrobe. It was nearing the end of the game, and she would soon realize how much she had lost. I retired at an early hour and arose at the earliest opportunity the following morning, having completed another morning jog and a surprisingly nutritious breakfast. I consulted my old laptop to ascertain the whereabouts of Jim, using his license plate number. The individual in question was Mr. James Robert Stevens, a divorce attorney. He had lost his wife and he had suffered a misfortune several years prior, and thus, he was forthcoming about it. However, he did exploit his personal tragedy to abduct another man's wife. My wife, as I had anticipated, was complicit in this scheme. Upon learning of his demise, I felt a sense of satisfaction regarding my preparations for His Holiness. He would understand the consequences of suffering. The pain he had previously experienced was not the pain of loss, but rather the pain associated with the act of snatching another man's wife. I proceeded to attend my place of employment in a normal manner, despite being on sabbatical. I then engaged in a routine jog to the bank, where I obtained a new ATM and credit cards. Once I had those items, I withdrew $300 from the ATM and I proceeded to lease a generic sedan from the Hertz rental agency, conveniently located down the street from the bank. After transferring my gym bag from the truck, I promptly contacted Susan via cellular telephone. To my surprise, she responded promptly upon the initial ring. "Jonathan, what is going on? Are you not currently at work?" "I am currently on a brief leave of absence." "You previously stated that you were curious about how long you intended to allow your children to remain at your grandparents' residence." On a recent occasion, she inquired as to whether you would object if her mother cared for the children. "She has grandchildren as well, and she misses them." I responded in a neutral tone. I was becoming more adept at concealing my displeasure. "I have no objection," she stated casually. The fact that she was acquiescing so rapidly was unusual and caused me concern. "That sounds wonderful. I will have Mom pick them up shortly." I lied again. "Can I expect some of your affection at home tonight after I get off?" I inquired about work in a hopeful tone. There was a long pause before she spoke again, and I noticed she had muted her phone's microphone. I suppose it was only fair after all that I promised you that I was yours tonight. She repeated it in an even tone, indicating that she did not want to soon. She would not have I considered her mood and tone to have improved slightly. Does this indicate that you are perceiving things my way? I had to suppress my irritation before responding with another persuasive explanation. Let me just say that I am leaning that way, but I want equal time with you. Is that too much to ask? Are you thinking clearly now? She inquired. I was not aware of the extent of my own cognitive abilities, I replied. Let us proceed at a measured pace, then, I suggested. We still need to discuss tonight when you get home, but I will require your presence for the entirety of the weekend. I have a special plan in mind. That sounds excellent, she remarked, her tone lighter now that she had determined I would agree with her. Therefore, if you can leave him early, I would like you to shower and be ready for me when I return from work. I will be leaving a little earlier tonight so that I can come home to you. I have missed you, my love. His assertion seemed plausible, yet the preceding days of rigorous exercise, dietary regimen, and abstinence from alcohol had markedly enhanced my physical condition. I anticipated that she would be gratified by my appearance that evening. I always shower and douche, I informed him. After spending time with him, I would not insult you by offering you second-rate affection. She laughed, and I knew she was also lying about it. I am going to pleasure you tonight. I want you to taste delicious and fresh for me. I also laughed. Do not worry, honey. I will. She concluded the call and I returned my phone to my pocket in the back seat of the car. I soon transformed back into the redneck ninja, albeit without my ski mask and shades. I slumped down in the car and waited. I was parked in the opposite route she would take to get home, but I couldn't be too careful. Susan is not as foolish as to believe that I would simply acquiesce to her wishes. Nevertheless, I started the car and drove into the driveway of the abandoned house. The asshole's home is just a few doors down and across the street from Jim. I leaned up over the mirror to see. He then proceeded to enter his driveway and garage, where he remained seated. I was prepared to wait for an extended period if necessary. Susan, however, surprised me by departing after only a few hours. She sent me a text message indicating that she was leaving and would return home in a timely manner, refreshed and prepared for me. I responded with a grimace and proceeded to back out of the driveway, following her. From a safe distance, I wanted to ascertain whether she was being truthful. Sure enough, she pulled into our driveway 5 minutes later, and I simply drove by and returned to his apartment. I parked in the alley behind the houses and entered through his back gate, just as I had the night before. However, this time I had brought along a bat with the intention of using it for a workout. I checked my ski mask and shades and decided it was time. Upon peering in his bedroom window, I observed that the boy was sleeping. I smiled grimly and tried the back door, which was unlocked. I did not even have to pick the lock. I considered this an act of arrogance, but I was fine with it. Some of my most esteemed films are the Dark Knight trilogy, featuring Christian Bale, Michael Caine, and a plethora of other exceptional performers. One of my most admired aspects was the way he altered his voice as Batman. I had similarly planned to do the same, as I was in the throes of redneck ninja mode. Upon entering his bedroom, he was still asleep. It appeared that he had spent the entire night engaging in sexual intercourse with my wife. This was unacceptable, and it was going to end immediately. I placed the gym bag on the floor and retrieved the bat. I cleared my throat loudly to attract his attention. He opened his eyes, which were initially blurry due to sleep. When he saw the bat in my hands, he became visibly distressed. I brought the bat down on his kneecap was fractured, and his mobility was now severely limited. He yelled, so I brought the bat down again, smashing his second kneecap. His movement was virtually non-existent. I smiled below my mask and lowered my voice to a snarl. I asked him how it felt. My associate, Jonathan, had warned me that. I informed him that I would refrain from taking any action against him if he revealed his identity. However, I made it clear that I would not hesitate to exact retribution if he failed to comply. I delivered a powerful blow to his testicles, causing them to rupture. He pleaded for his life, imploring me not to kill him. Despite the excruciating pain, I reiterated that I would comply with his demands. I offered him financial compensation and other forms of assistance. He shed tears of pain and pleaded for mercy, stating that he had no desire to receive monetary compensation. In response, I issued a stern warning, stating that if he continued to harbor negative thoughts about Susan Freeman, I would return and cause him significant harm. This act was intended as a deterrent, not a threat. The damage to his marriage was already evident. I emphasized this with another quick strike to his testicles. He was not as well endowed as I was, at least based on what I observed the night before. He was in good physical condition, but I would be in better shape shortly. However, he would be unable to compete with me in batting and broke his left arm. I located his cellular telephone and proceeded to batter it with the bat. I then proceeded to batter both of his landline telephones. My objective was to prevent him from contacting Susan or any other individual. I subsequently exited the premises through the rear, traversing the fence and entering the vehicle. I then returned to my residence to change my attire. I subsequently proceeded to a convenience store. I proceeded to cross town and dispose of the bat. I then proceeded to refuel the sedan and subsequently departed the area, leaving the remainder of the gym in a state of disrepair. Afterwards, I removed my fingerprints from the torch and subsequently incinerated it. It was regrettable to burn the aforementioned sunglasses, which were of considerable value. However, this was an acceptable outcome, given the investment made. I then instructed my own divorce attorney to draft documents against Susan, with whom I was suing for complete custody of the children and 75% of all financial assets. I was not prepared to pay her alimony or request child support, provided that she cooperated. I declined to inform her parents of the real cause for our divorce. I informed my attorney that I would soon have an admission of her affair taped. I then returned to the rental agency and returned the automobile. I thanked the agent before returning to the diesel shop and entering. I informed my boss that I could complete the remainder of the shift, but that I would need to depart early to see Susan. I informed him that I would complete the remainder of the shift, but that I would need to depart early to see Susan. I explained that I still needed a few days off, and he was agreeable. After I finished my duties at the shop, I decided to purchase a prepaid cell phone on my way home. I proceeded to dial 911 and, in a voice that was both assertive and urgent, informed the operator of the situation that had transpired. I then proceeded to throw the phone out the window into the canal that ran alongside the road. At this point, I was no longer concerned with the phone's survival. I simply wanted Mr. James Robert Stevens to experience the same pain I had endured during the majority of his final days. During this period, he engaged in sexual intercourse with my wife, and I was responsible for significantly impairing his quality of life. In my view, this was an equitable arrangement. I had removed the voice recorder from my pocket and activated it. The following exchange with my wife should not be interpreted literally. I disapprove of her affair, both at the present time and in the past. I spoke into the recorder, then turned it off and placed it in my pocket. I entered the garage and removed Susan's GPS device. I then proceeded to place the voice-activated recorders into my vehicle. Once this was completed, I reactivated my pocket recorder and entered the residence. Upon approaching Susan and wrapping my arms around her waist, I whispered, "That smells nice, darling." I then caressed the side of her neck. At that moment, she was cooking steaks on the stove. Furthermore, she had already prepared mashed potatoes and green beans. "Thank you, honey. I'm glad you're more accepting of the situation now," she added, turning her face up to kiss me. I replied, maintaining a light tone as if I were addressing a potential threat, "Would you have divorced me if I had not agreed to it?" "I wouldn't. I would have done so immediately if you had attempted to deny me access to my beloved. I apologize, my love. I wish circumstances might have been different. I did not intend to threaten you. Please believe that I love you. Would you have really taken my children? But why not allow me to see them? That would be rather cruel. Wouldn't it have been a possibility?" I maintained a light tone, as though I were acquiescing to her demands. "Yes," she replied, "I would have. I am taking Monday off if you are able to join me on that day. However, I must meet with him again on Tuesday night and will remain with him until Wednesday morning. I will then return home to care for our children. It is difficult to reconcile this situation with the role of a mother. I must inquire once more, is there nothing I can do to prevent this?" I asked in a forlorn tone. She groaned again, maintaining a mild and condescending tone. "I regret to inform you, but I am obliged to see this through. Please be reassured that I will continue to make time for you and the children whenever possible. This was an excellent opportunity to declare her an unsuitable mother, but tonight, she was mine. My lawyer had informed me that she would have the necessary documents prepared by Monday, and I planned to serve her with them either at this location or at the hospital, should she become aware of the identity of her former partner before then. All that was required of me was to make the necessary telephone call on Monday morning. After dinner, I embraced her in my arms. That night, I engaged in sexual intercourse with her. It was a rapid and intense encounter, a departure from our usual pace. She experienced multiple orgasms, likely due to my superior stamina and the absence of alcohol. I penetrated her deeply, and she was in a state of intense pleasure. She was cross-eyed from the intensity of her orgasms, which were among the most powerful she had ever experienced. In light of these observations, I must question whether I was truly lacking in bed. I was going to demonstrate my capacity to perform at a high level. I took the Viagra and initiated contact again, but it wasn't the entirety of my plan. I marked her, leaving hickeys on her breasts, neck, stomach, and inner thighs. I was reclaiming her, and she was enjoying every moment of it. Only after we were finished and she went to the bathroom did she emitted a cry of astonishment at the markings I had left on her. She then proceeded to enter the bedroom where I was situated, displaying a countenance of disquietude. She then articulated the following: "He no longer desires for me to be marked." I then responded with the following: "He is not the one who decides these matters. You are my wife, and I desire for you to be recognized as such. If he does not approve, that is of no consequence to me." The issue at hand is that she never explicitly forbade me from enjoying the experience. Once she was satisfied, her demeanor softened, and she resumed her position on the bed, grasping my hand. Jonathan, the sensation was unparalleled, even surpassing the experience with him. It became evident that her climaxes were not merely a display of ego, they were genuine. In the previous 4 hours, she had achieved a higher level of sexual gratification than ever before. I could discern a notable difference between her previous performances and those of the last 4 hours. Prior to this, I had not been particularly adept in bed. However, I was now motivated to perform to the best of my abilities for her pleasure. It seemed to have been an effective strategy. Susan, I hope that this experience will encourage you to terminate your relationship with him. I love you. I hope to spend the rest of my life with you. I simply want you to try to understand my point of view. You have been with this man for nearly a year, and I want my wife back. I asked her, my eyes pleading with her. I had become rather skilled at masking my feelings. I had sex with her out of instead of tenderness, there was rage. Instead of love, there was hatred. However, I had previously received considerable recognition for my ability to tolerate her behavior. I reminded her that I was still her husband and expressed my continued affection. She acknowledged this with a cheerful smile. Prior to this, she had been prepared for the possibility of my divorce. Now, however, she was caught off guard. The following day, she reminded me of Susan, my former wife. She cooked, cleaned the house, and even initiated sexual intercourse with me that night. I informed her that I had taken Saturday and Monday off so that we could spend more time together. The time spent together was enjoyable for both parties. I admit that I derived pleasure from her company as well, but now that I had observed her true character, I was not going to be deceived by her facade again. That night, I reaffirmed the marks I had made on her the previous Friday, and she did not object. It was not until Monday that the situation deteriorated further. I implored her to reconsider her decision to return to him. Instead, she retrieved her phone and proceeded to the living room. I informed her that I would be picking up the children, and she replied that it was fine. I proceeded to collect my son and 2 daughters from their mother's residence, and she expressed gratitude for allowing them to remain there. On our return journey, we made a stop at a Burger King restaurant, where I purchased lunch for us. The children were delighted with their meal, which was not of the same quality as that served by McDonald's, but nevertheless, a significant improvement. As we were about to leave, my mobile phone rang with a ringtone that I recognized as belonging to Susan. I responded with a jovial remark. I had taken the children to be late for lunch, and we were now en route home. "Jonathan, could you clarify the significance of this?" she inquired. I apologized and explained that I had forgotten to mention that she had been served when I was picking up my children. You must have received the documents, I said. I apologized and explained that we could discuss it when we got home. I indicated that I had something to discuss and terminated the call before she could respond. I then turned off my phone. I proceeded to the garage and brought the children inside. Despite the divorce papers, Susan was delighted to see them. The children hurried up to their mother and asked her where she had gone. She made up that she had volunteered a great deal of time to the cause, but then admitted the reality when she added, "We had a nice weekend with our parents." I instructed the children to go play in their rooms while I spoke with Susan. I took her into the basement after they had left. "Now, Susan," I began, "I am going to divorce you. I must apologize, but I am unable to tolerate this situation any longer. I have frequently requested that you terminate this illicit relationship. Furthermore, I now have evidence of your involvement in this affair on audio recording. I will forward that recording to my attorney, who will utilize it as evidence in the proceedings. As evidenced by the divorce documents, I am seeking full custody and the truth that you have been ignoring. The evidence presented at the trial will demonstrate that your family obligations are being subordinated to your romantic involvement. Your romantic relationship with the individual in question will be perceived as a factor that renders you an unfit mother. If he is appointed as your legal counsel, it is likely that he will face professional disciplinary action, as per the advice of my own attorney. Such an action constitutes a serious breach of ethics, particularly in the context of divorce proceedings. She was rendered speechless, struggling to find the words to express her thoughts. I had assumed that you were amenable to such an arrangement. However, she interjected, expressing disbelief. "Susan, I have come to realize that I never truly knew you. Similarly, I recognize that you never knew me. I have striven to fulfill your every desire throughout the years. Over the years, I made numerous efforts to ensure your happiness. I purchased a home for you, an automobile, and a considerable amount of jewelry. I also spent beyond our financial limits, but I compensated for this through overtime. My actions were driven by a genuine desire to enhance your life and the lives of your children. I regret that I was unable to fulfill this aspiration and offer you the affection and love were due to you, Susan. I truly loved you, but your affair destroyed the affection I had for you. I never claimed that I was fine with it. In fact, I gave you one last chance this morning to entirely give him up. I implored you to do so, and had you done so, I would not have served you this morning. You telephoned this morning before I collected the children. I am aware that you did so. I offer my sincere apologies for this, Susan." I shake my head in disbelief. Of course, I did not wish her to be aware that I had been planning this course of action since the divorce judgment was issued. I promised her that I would allow her generous visitation rights with the children. The subsequent step would be unpleasant, but it was necessary to inform my mother and her father of the probable dissolution of our marriage. I initially contacted my mother to inform her of my intention to move out and to explain that I had filed for divorce from Susan. I provided her with a comprehensive account of the circumstances surrounding the divorce, including the fact that I had recorded her admission of the affair and how she prioritized her lover over her husband and children. Mom agreed to be my babysitter while I worked each day. We would be moving in with Grandma, and they were pleased that Mom had a few rooms at her house after Dad died. We packed up quickly and informed Susan that she was always welcome to join us at Mom's house, provided that she did not bring her boyfriend. 2 days later, she learned that old Jimmy boy was in the hospital. I was back at work when she called. "Hello, Susan. What up?" I asked. "You almost murdered," she yelled in my ear. The individual in question was unclear. I responded affirmatively, indicating that my performance merited recognition. I had effectively utilized bewilderment. The woman then expressed that I had nearly caused Jim irreparable harm. She was visibly distraught. I inquired about the identity of Jim. The woman, Susan, was perplexed and expressed disbelief. She then asked who I intended to harm. I was irritated and inquired about the individual in question. I was unaware of any Jims other than Jim Barnes, who was standing next to me at the time. Barnes was a former colleague. I informed him of the situation and he responded with an evilly smirking expression when I told him about the lawyer, his lover, and what I had done to him. Jim was attempting to contain his laughter as he overheard my conversation. Jim was the man I had previously mentioned whose wife had been unfaithful to him, resulting in a contentious divorce. She realized that I would not accept it and that she could not prove it. "Susan, is Jim your boyfriend?" I inquired quietly. "Is he almost dead?" "It could not be Jim. The only thing that could kill Jim is a heart attack." I smiled at Jim, who could not contain his laughter, and dashed into the office. He said he was attacked, but he did not know who did it. Susan revealed. He was rendered incapacitated due to a traumatic injury. I responded with sincerity, as if he had stolen the item in question from me. I am not remorseful about this situation. Susan, I am being entirely truthful when I say that I had no involvement in what happened to him. However, I would be willing to offer a beverage to the individual responsible. Did you ever believe that he would seduce someone else's spouse for you? It was not feasible for you to be with him at all times. The seeds of mistrust had been sown. You don't believe he would, she began, but I interrupted. Why not? I mentioned that he was depressed when his wife died. He used it to seduce you, Susan said. No, it wasn't. She paused and considered it, taking some time to reflect on everything that had happened during their romance. Oh my God, you're correct, she screamed. The hoe in the angelic choir, speaking through Susan's voice, declared that I was correct. She had never explicitly acknowledged this, but on this day, she had finally done so. Susan had marked this day on the calendar for me, the day I had been proven correct about something. I laughed aloud, and she reacted negatively. Regardless of the reason for her displeasure, she did not contest my assertion. The mother of the children in question testified that she was able to provide childcare services for the children while their father was at work. The judge considered all relevant factors, including the mother's behavior over the previous year, during which she had an affair with Jim Stevens while leaving the children with responsible caregivers. The mother's actions were taken in order to continue her affair in secrecy. The judge did not rule her incompetent but instead appointed me as the primary custodian. He designated Susan as the secondary custodian, but only on the condition that she not bring her lovers around the children. I was not pleased with this decision, but I was pleased that, before she became involved with Jim, Susan was an excellent mother. She would now have the opportunity to be a terrific mother again. The judge then informed me that I would only be required to pay child support for the time that the children spent with Susan. Susan was obliged to obtain employment at a local college, as she had studied accounting and was therefore able to secure a position in that field. We sold the house and divided the proceeds equally. The shared accounts that I had fled with at the outset were split 7:3. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me $525. When Susan attempted to lodge a complaint, the judge briefly glanced at her and stated, "Mrs. Fremont, I remind you that you nearly lost custody of your children due to your own selfishness. Now, get a job." The same judge presided over my alienation of love action against James Robert Stevens. He did take it seriously, which was surprising given Susan's confession. The testimony she presented was persuasive, and the judge ultimately ruled in my favor. I received a settlement of $525,000. I was gratified by the judge's decision. When the final gavel dropped, we were formally divorced, and I was $525,000 richer as a result of her efforts. I invited my attorney, Angie, to join me for cocktails at the Silver Spa. I continued to exercise and eat well, and I had stopped drinking almost entirely. On this particular night, however, I desired to consume at least 1 or 2 beers. My pony keg has been dismantled, and I have achieved the desired level of fitness. I was cognizant of the necessity to be available for my children and to resume my search for a partner. I fervently hoped to find an individual who was not as superficial and self-centered as Susan Angela Johnson. Susan is a woman of considerable physical beauty. Her dark cocoa skin appears lovely. It had been nearly 7 months since I had last had sexual intercourse with Susan. I had surprised her with the divorce papers during that period. During that time, Angie and I had become quite close. We were not merely an attorney's client, we had become close friends. As such, we went to the bar for a few beers. "Jonathan, what are your plans?" Angie inquired while we were sipping our beers. "Return to work and raise my children as effectively as possible. I discovered a smaller house with a single level and 4 bedrooms. It is a lot cheaper than the large house Susan constructed for me approximately 3 years ago." I replied, "No, we have not yet moved in." She asked, "Have you moved in yet?" I confirmed that we had moved in a few weeks ago and closed on the house. The residence is situated in closer proximity to the workplace, and the children appear to enjoy it. I smiled and inquired as to her opinion. Despite being aware that I was likely to lose a considerable sum of money, she agreed to represent me in the case. I am grateful for her assistance. I clinked bottles with her. I have been divorced for approximately 4 years. My spouse was discovered to have been unfaithful, which prompted my decision to terminate the marriage. She seemed to notice my astonishment, and I would like to understand why I retained your services. Given the considerable discount, I am not inclined to view cheaters favorably. I smiled in response, indicating my agreement. We have fulfilled our financial obligations. Would you be amenable to terminating our professional relationship? She inquired, her expression indicating surprise. I had asked about this because I do not engage in romantic relationships with clients. She shrugged her shoulders, her smile widening. I smiled back, and then she replied, "Consider me fired. Do you wish to go to dinner? I am interested in pursuing a romantic relationship with you." She proposed that she come to my house so that I could cook her something. We have been dating for 6 months, and I have never been happier. I am a powerful divorce attorney, and Angie is not as high maintenance as Susan. She loves me, loves my children, and cares deeply about them. She is affectionately referred to as Mommy by the children, despite the fact that Susan is still their mother. Subsequently, Angie has taken up residence with us, and Susan occasionally joins us for dinner when she visits with the children on weekends. Angie and I engage in sexual intercourse, and we enjoy it immensely. It is, in general, a highly satisfactory existence. However, he has never recuperated from the consequences of my actions. He was left impoverished and isolated after spending all of his wife's insurance proceeds on medical expenses. Expenses, court fees, and litigation for alienation of affection, all of these factors contributed to his departure. Susan appears to be doing much better now, at least according to her doctor. Prior to this, her hormones were severely out of balance, but she has been taking supplements and appears to be much more balanced. She has a solid job at an accounting business in her town and is making a decent living. I was promoted to supervisor of the diesel shop, and my salary is now the same as it was before, despite working 40 hours instead of 60. I now have more time to spend with both my children and the new woman in my life. Susan will have to live with the consequences of her actions, which I accept. She now blames herself for everything, and I do not intend to console her. She does not date. Despite her assertion that she remains in love with me, I anticipate that she will experience profound regret for the remainder of her life. I harbor a degree of resentment towards her, and I find myself hoping that she meets a tragic end. I must concede that I am currently experiencing a degree of resentment. Fortunately, Angie is present to distract me from the challenges my former partner has presented. Currently, I find myself experiencing a sense of contentment with my circumstances. On a different note, on Saturday morning, I awoke to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the kitchen across the living room and into my bedroom. I reached out and moved my head toward the window, which was partially covered by drapes and already had sunlight flooding through. I recalled that today was Kate's 5th wedding anniversary and that I had prepared a gift for her a few days before to present today. 10 years ago, I met her at one of the university's social gatherings. We met at one of the university's social venues and there was an immediate affinity between us. We dated for 5 years and lived together. We shared our experiences of joy and sorrow before deciding to formalize our relationship with a simple but elegant wedding ceremony on the city's ocean front. We initially lived in an apartment to facilitate a more convenient and proximate commute to work. Subsequently, we purchased a house. We relocated to a rural area outside the city to enable us to spend our weekends in nature and to breathe fresh air away from the dust and noise and bustle of the city. I secured employment with a large corporation in a position that required significant effort and time. I occasionally worked late during the week, but weekends were always ours. Kate discovered her vocation through cooking. She was an excellent cook who aspired. She began her entrepreneurial journey with modest orders from home. She solicited feedback from friends and acquaintances to refine her culinary skills. Her dishes were consistently of high quality, and her clientele grew significantly over time. She even created a social media page where she maintained her food blog. Today, I decided to present her with a new multi. A few months ago, I observed her perusing cookbooks for similar items. While she lacked many culinary utensils, I believed they would prove useful for her business. Consequently, I purchased one recently and stored it in the garage. I was determined to keep the gift a surprise. Therefore, I arose at night and placed it on the kitchen table, adorning it with a bow and a card inscribed with a love message. Upon rising, I extricated myself from bed and proceeded to locate my slippers, robe, and coffee. Kate greeted me with a kiss and expressed gratitude for the gift. She then proceeded to enumerate the various attributes she found appealing about the gift, and I reciprocated her sentiments. "My dear, happy anniversary to you." I kissed her gently and embraced her. "I adore you, Charles." In response, she said, "You know, I created a new beef dish just for tonight. It is going to be delicious. I hope the guests will enjoy it." To be honest, I had hoped to celebrate in a restaurant with only the two of us. We were strangers, that's what we intended to accomplish earlier. However, it is our anniversary, so I thought it would be a good idea to host a small celebration right here. It would be beneficial to host a modest celebration in this location. It is tranquil and serene here. She proceeded to the kitchen counter and began preparing mugs of coffee. I have long admired her assertiveness and ambition, but on this particular day, I did not desire an excessive number of individuals in my residence. I hope we can dedicate time to enjoying romance as we did in the early years of our relationship, when we were engaged in various roles. She then proceeded to play games, which caused me a modicum of embarrassment. However, I was reluctant to mar the ambience, so I acquiesced to her decision. "How many individuals did you invite?" I took a seat on a stool and leaned against the table. "Not many, largely close friends and a few of my regulars." She then produced cups and presented me with one. I was not aware that the Thompsons were getting divorced, but I nevertheless persuaded them both to attend. She then sat across the table from me. It is unfortunate that they were such a couple. They were an exemplary match. I was unaware that they had parted ways. I was not privy to the specifics of their dissolution. Chloe did not divulge any information. I was only aware that they had been engaged in a dispute recently. That is their business. The crucial point is that we are in a satisfactory position. Yes, we are doing well. She removed my hand from the table and gently caressed it. We did not engage in any significant activities this morning. After breakfast, we watched a romantic film on the local channel. Then, Kate elected to commence preparing party treats, while I focused on setting up. I also procured a table and seating in the yard where the gathering would take place. Additionally, I obtained a pair of speakers and a tape recorder so that I could play music to accompany the party. I created an additional area for smokers, as there were few among our friends who smoke, so that the smoke would not bother the other visitors at the table. The few hours of cooking passed quickly. I even assisted Kate in the kitchen when she required extra hands. While the food was cooking, she permitted me to sample sauces and creams. I was granted the privilege of assisting with the preparation of the sauce by chopping onions. My assistance was met with gratitude. By the time the guests arrived, the meal was ready to be served. "I believe the first guests have arrived," Kate replied, glancing out the window with the curtain ajar as she heard the hum of a car approaching on the street. She removed her apron and went to greet them. Soon, others joined in the celebration. The event proved to be enjoyable and light-hearted. The atmosphere was convivial and jovial, with a relatively limited selection of alcoholic beverages. This did not deter the guests from sampling more of my wife's culinary creations. Everyone acknowledged and admired her skill. "Kate, your new dish is superb." Chloe was the first to taste it. "Thank you. This is a new dish. Do not request the recipe. I will not provide it." Meanwhile, I approached Kevin Thompson. I was surprised by the prospect of his divorce from his wife, with whom he had lived for many years, was a topic of discussion. I greeted him with a cheerful hello, and he responded with a similar greeting. I inquired about his well-being and expressed that I was not dissatisfied with my own circumstances. I then asked about the circumstances of his divorce, to which he replied that he and his wife had been experiencing disagreements. He took a few sips of champagne, seemingly contemplating the appropriate response. I then asked about the nature of the disagreements, and he informed me that they had been experiencing difficulties in understanding each other. Chloe, his wife, had requested a divorce, and he seemed reluctant to discuss the matter further. It is evident that a significant event must have transpired for them to arrive at that decision. I extended an invitation to him to assist me in retrieving a few more bottles of wine for the table from the cellar. Upon our arrival below, he proceeded to survey the extensive cellar, which contained a considerable number of bottles of wine, some of which were quite aged and costly. The phone rang abruptly, and I answered it, but the signal was not robust. After informing Kevin of the necessary items, I proceeded to exit the basement in order to respond to the call. My supervisor initiated communication, commending my performance but then informing me of an imminent meeting on Monday morning that I was expected to attend. As I conversed, I became aware of a slow, melodic tempo emanating from the outdoors. Upon closer observation, I discerned that several couples had congregated, including Kate and Kevin, who had already demonstrated the capacity to manage his alcohol consumption. I, however, did not join them. I did not wish to disturb them, so I took a seat on a nearby bench. After observing them for some time, I realized that Kate was devoting herself too much to the dance. I observed him wrap his arm around her waist while she rested her head on his shoulder. This image made me feel uncomfortable. I even considered walking over and correcting them, but Kate detected my jealousy and drew back a little, signaling that she did not want me to do so. Everything was progressing well. Charles initiated a dance with Chloe. I was approached by Chloe, who commented on the pleasant weather but noted my apparent despondency. She extended an invitation to join her, but I declined. She then departed. I consulted my phone to ascertain the time and discovered that the battery charge was nearly depleted. I decided to proceed inside to recharge the device. I searched the desk drawer in the hallway but was unable to locate the charger. After a brief period of reflection, I recalled that I had last utilized the device in the bedroom. I proceeded to enter the room and discovered the charger on the nightstand in close proximity to the bed. As I inserted the wire, I observed that Kate's laptop was open on the second nightstand. It appeared that she had become so engrossed in her culinary endeavors that she had entirely forgotten about it. Despite my reservations about perusing the personal accounts of others, I was compelled to investigate further. A photograph of a beef meal from today, presumably taken on her mobile phone while preparing it, piqued my interest. I sat down and began perusing the feed, but found nothing of interest and was about to close my laptop when I noticed the messenger was open with one of the discussions being with Kevin. A few embarrassing thoughts immediately entered my mind, and I clicked on the chat. As I began reading the correspondence, I was struck by the realization that Kate had been engaged in a secret affair with Kevin. The messages, which included phrases like, "Sweetie, I feel so fantastic with you," and other similar experiences, left a profound impression on me. It was as if I had been struck by an electric shock. I was compelled to delve deeper into the disclosed realities, though I was initially uncertain as to why. The content of the chat room provoked a strong emotional response, prompting me to react with anger. I was compelled to slam the laptop shut and exit the bedroom abruptly. I proceeded to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, which I consumed in one sitting. As I sipped the wine, I came to recognize that my perception of Kate and Kevin had been negatively affected. My initial inclination was to confront them and address the matter immediately. However, I felt that this approach might be too simplistic. I was perplexed by the circumstances surrounding Kevin and Chloe's divorce. It appeared that she had discovered his infidelity, yet she remained conspicuously silent about it. She was notably cordial to Kate, which led me to speculate that she was unaware of Kate's romantic involvement. As these thoughts rapidly circulated in my mind, Kate proceeded into the kitchen. "Charles, I have been looking for you. Where have you been? Our guests are waiting for us. Why would they become restless without me?" I murmured, and Kate observed the glass in my hands and the bottle next to it. She regarded me with a critical eye and jested that consuming alcohol alone was detrimental to my health. As she spoke, I imagined thrusting the bottle into her mouth and forcing her to drink it. My wife, Charles, then diverted my attention from these concerns. "Are you listening to me? Let's go," she said. However, I was so emotionally absorbed in my fantasy that when she called out to me, I clenched my fingers and shattered the glass in my hand, injuring my palm. "Oh dear," Charles said. Kate grabbed a cloth and proceeded to apply it to the wound. I did not want her to touch me, so I yanked my hand away forcefully. "Let me go," I said. "I will do that." "It's fine," I murmured. Kate merely glanced at me in surprise, unsure why my mood had shifted. She had no idea that by complete coincidence I already knew everything. I proceeded to the bathroom to clean the wound and search the medicine cabinet for a suitable bandage. I left Kate in the kitchen while I washed the wound and the blood dripped into the wash basin. In my mind, a plan for revenge was taking shape. I had always been envious of Kate and she was well aware of it, so she attempted to act like it, but now my rage was even more intense than if she had just come and told me she wanted to leave me for someone else. She was attempting to leave me for someone else, which diminished my respect and pride. I returned to the guests shortly after Kate was conversing with the girls and sharing her recipes. I noticed Kevin to the side. He was smoking and did not notice me approaching him. I inquired about his plans following the divorce. He replied that he had not yet considered the matter but that he eventually hoped to find a new partner. It has been many years since I have had the opportunity to pursue a romantic relationship. I am not concerned about it, as I do not have children. It seems as though you are indifferent about the situation. I am not going to express my emotions in an overly dramatic manner. We have been friends for years, but we do not see each other very often. I would like to invite you over for dinner tomorrow night. Kate is up to something new, and we can play chess as we. The concept is not inherently flawed. What time should I arrive? There is no need to arrange a specific time. I will be in the area tomorrow morning and can pick you up. I had previously arranged to pick him up from his residence, which is conveniently located nearby. I stopped by the apartment and signed into my office account using my computer. I then made a few more stops before picking up Kevin at the agreed-upon meeting point. We remained in the country house for the duration of our visit. Upon arrival, Kevin's appearance was somewhat surprising, yet my wife welcomed him. We waited for Kate to complete cooking before inviting Kevin to join us for dinner. He was eager to accept, and as my wife and Kevin sat down at the table, I proceeded to the basement to purchase a bottle of wine to accompany the meal. I selected one of the, "Oh, Charles, is it the bottle you selected? What is the occasion? It is not even a holiday." Kate glanced at the bottle with astonishment. "Have you opened it yet? I've been wanting to try it for a long time." Today was the perfect day for it, but I couldn't stop myself. Across the table, Kevin, who is partial to such libations, proposed a toast. "Here's to friendship," he said, and we raised our glasses. My phone rang at that precise moment. I excused myself and apologized when I answered. "It's work," I said. "I need to take this." I sat down, placed my glass on the table, and walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway. Kate and Kevin were waiting for me after the toast was spoken, and they opted to appreciate I could discern the flavor of the booze from their conversation and the sound of them drinking wine. After a few minutes, I returned to the kitchen to find Kevin and Kate still seated, their heads resting on the table and their hands gripping the stems of their glasses. Both of their eyes were open but did not move. I approached Kevin first and placed my fingertips on his neck to check for a pulse. I found no pulse in either subject, so I performed the same examination on Kate. Once I had ascertained that they were no longer breathing, I transported their bodies to the bedroom, undressed them, and placed them on the bed. I donned my gloves and placed their glasses and bottle in a dish next to them on the bedside tables. The scene resembled that of a romantic date in the kitchen. I proceeded to meticulously clean everything, paying particular attention to the third serve. Having completed my tasks, I secured the door and departed the premises. I continued to examine the details of my office account as though I had spent the entire day working remotely. In my hand, I crumpled the lethal package with a sense of unease. Thank you for listening to today's account. If you found this narrative engaging, we kindly request that you express your appreciation by liking and subscribing to our channel. If you have not yet done so, we also encourage you to leave a comment below to share your thoughts on the events that transpired. We wish you well.